Hello, everybody. I call to order this joint meeting of the School Committee and the South Kingstown Town Council for an initial budget hearing. It is Monday, December 15th, 2014. The time is 7:07, it appears. Number one on the agenda is a discussion regarding the status of the fiscal year 2014-2015 budget program and its impact on development of the FY 2015-2016 budget. Mr. Alfred.
Tonight's budget session is really the initial budget session for the 15-16 year. It's an opportunity for the council in joint session with the school committee to look at general information about the budget development process, because there's many people that have not gone through it, as well as members of the general public. It also provides for documentation on certain base budget components, such as property tax projections, projects, cost factors, and contractual obligations. It also provides really a first opportunity to look at the financial foundations for the community, for the council, and what impact the 15-16 year will have. And most importantly, it provides an opportunity for council and school committee to talk about general goals and objectives and to hear from the public as to concerns or issues that they feel are relevant to the development of the new budget process. Our budget process was really established with amendments to the town charter on November 7th of 2006. The charter amendments got rid of the financial town meeting as a means of adopting a budget and established an entire new procedure. The days and the meeting schedules were required under charter to be published. They were published on December 11th in the South County Independent. Also, the meeting schedule has been published on the town's website. So we've got meetings that will take us through January, February, March, and April for final adoption at the end of the month, and the schedule is put forward. I've included a flow chart which was part of the budget development process in 2006. There's not detail that you're going to see on the screen, but there's detail as far as the printed documentation that's been provided out and indicates how the budget process works. I think the most important thing is that on the initial meeting itself, what we're attempting to do is to solicit comments and to provide foundation information. The true budget process for the school committee will get underway in January. That process will go through February 14th when they deliver their proposed budget consideration to the town manager's office. The town manager will put out the budget on March 1st to the town council. Sessions will be held in early March, with the council being required to adopt a preliminary budget document before April 1st. The council, after developing the preliminary budget, would then hold two budget sessions to solicit comments from the public and eventually adopt a final budget by the end of the month of April. Within that process, there's two places for public having direct input. First is after the budget has been adopted on a preliminary basis, public has the right to petition with 25 signatures to be able to have the council consider and be required to vote up or down specific questions. Someone could ask for a $5,000 item or $500,000 item. It doesn't mean that the council has to give approval or rejection to it. It means the council has to deliberate on it and has to act on it. They can modify a proposal that comes forward, or they can deny it in its totality. Once the budget has been adopted, there's an opportunity for a budget referendum, and that would require 200 signatures and a request with those 200 signatures to either reduce or increase the municipal budget or the school budget by no less than $250,000. If that's done, the council's approved budget is held in abeyance until a referendum is held on the first Tuesday after the first Saturday in June. That's the budget process. To date, since 2006, we have not seen a lot of use of the referendum process, but the public does have that opportunity to be heard by the council, to demand review by the council, and if they feel they haven't received proper consideration with questions of $250,000 or more, to bring those items before a special election, if you will, a referendum to be heard in June. So let's move on. The schedule is there. I've put it in the presentation so that the presentation, which is available online, as well as with the paper copies here tonight, to provide people with the schedule that the council has agreed to at this point. I do caution that there are times when we may see revisions in the schedule, but we will keep the website updated if there's revisions that are necessary. In terms of budget framework, the legislative act in 2006 required that a property tax cap be put into place in Rhode Island. At that time, the cap was at 5.5%, and it was required to go down a quarter point per year for each of the next several years until 2013, when it got down to a 4%. I want to caution people, this is 4% on the tax levy, not the tax rate. So it means that you can only raise 4% more in any year over what the levy was on the prior year. And obviously, the levy is proportionally provided to the school department as well as the municipal program itself. I provided this chart, and I think on page 7, it's an indication of what past practice has been. People have always expressed concerns on tax levy. Over the last 5 years, from 2010 through 2014, the average increase has been 1.05% in terms of levy. This is even though the cap in place was at the 4%. So as a community, we've stayed at about 1%. And you can look at, during that same period of time on a statewide basis, the communities across the state have averaged about 3.3. So we're about a third of what the going rate has been for property levy increases across the state of Rhode Island. When you look at the 2015 year, our levy increase was a 0.78, so it wasn't even the 1%. I think it's also important to note that the share difference, when we talk about a tax levy of $67,607,000 in the current year, 16.25 stay with the municipal side of the budget, and 51.4 deal with school-related costs. That's both the debt service associated with the schools, net of state aid, and it's inclusive of the transfer for the operations of the school fund. So it's a 76-24 split on the levy as we see it today. Moving on to page 8 of the presentation, I wanted to take a look at what the state's revenue estimating conference did. This is what the state of Rhode Island uses in budget development process in terms of interviewing various economists to determine where they see the revenue and cost of living costs going on a year-to-year basis, and to look out over a 5-year horizon. When we look at the chart that's here, the conference adopted a consensus economic forecast based on the testimony that came from the chief economist from Moody's. And what they've estimated was that employment growth is expected to average 1% in 2015 and average between 2015 and the year 2020. Personal income is projected to increase in 15 by 4% and in 16 by 5.9% and then start to decline. Personal income growth averages 4.2% in the 2015 fiscal year through the 2020 forecast period. So what we're looking at is very moderate growth that's anticipated across the state with non-farm employment. We're looking at moderate growth in terms of personal income projections. We're also looking at an unemployment rate in the state at about 7.3%, dropping to a projection over the 5 years down to 5.2. So the news is better than it's been over the last several years. It's still not the information that we would like to see in terms of being down into the pre-recession periods with unemployment that we're averaging in the low fours. But I think from an economic forecast, it's showing that the state is beginning to make progress. Unfortunately, the revenue estimates that the state's seeing are raising at a slower rate than what their expenditure growth is. So they are still projecting over the next 5 years sizable growth in their deficit positions, which means that there will most likely be continuations of cutbacks in terms of program. A major portion of the state budget is in the use of social service programs, which they have little control over, but take a great deal of the sales tax and income tax. There's also a concern as to what the gaming tax availability is going to be within the next 3 years. So all of these provide negative forecasts as far as the state budget program going forward. If we move on in terms of unemployment in South Kingstown, you can see that that during level economic times, we see unemployment in the 4 to a 4.5% rate. And what we saw was the recession years starting in 2008 through 2013. And we're seeing a sizable reduction in October of 2014. Now, these are not seasonally adjusted. Seasonally adjusted, we would be looking at the rates probably being in the area of a 6 to 6.2% value. But when we look at October of 2013, it was 7.6%. So we're down considerably in terms of the unemployment number of people that are unemployed. I will caution that when we talk about unemployment rates by definition are really only looking at people that are actively looking for employment. There may be persons that are underemployed at this point but unable to find full-time work that would not be within that number. So the 5.4 is still a high number for what we would like to see in the community going forward, but it's certainly in a much better position than it has been over the past 5 years. I want to move on to what's the municipal landscape that we're looking at. As I said, that the property tax cap is a 4% on the levy. That's not what our objective is in putting a budget development together. We have, over the last several years, used a midpoint or a 2% in terms of the starting points for the budget, and I caution that that's a starting point. What we need to be able to see is if we had the 2% and the anticipated third-party revenues or local revenues, where would we see budgets going? And from a school perspective and a town perspective, we're hopefully presenting a lot of that information to you tonight. South Kingstown still has an unassigned fund balance of and it's about 13.7% or $10.3 million. The adopted policy of the council in past years has been to have a 60-day availability of monies on hand. That would take you up to about a 16.7% value. We have not seen from a staff perspective a need to go up to that level. We think that in the 11 to 12% range, we are still in a proper condition in terms of being able to address unknown factors or things where council wishes to cede money to specific projects. I want to talk also about pension funds tonight, and I'll have a couple of specific slides because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there as to what the position of the municipality is as far as its pension systems. And we also want to look at bonded indebtedness and what that impact is on the property tax levy. The next slide on page 11, I think what I'm trying to provide you here is a snapshot at what the 5-year period in terms of budgetary change. And you can see that the most substantial change is in the property tax levy as a share of the overall budget. And you can see that it's gone up almost 3 full percentage points. So we've seen a budget that's averaging about a $675,000 a year need for increase, and we're seeing sizable decreases. When you look at the state aid, over the 5-year period, we've lost another $1.6 million, and that's on the municipal side. This isn't looking at the school aid. So if you look at it, each year for 5 years, we've lost $325,000 in aid. Started out with general revenue sharing, which the state decided they were going to take away. It continued 2 years later with the slashing of the reimbursement for motor vehicles. So we're looking at some major changes in terms of how we have to fund the budget. We're also looking at the local revenues are down. Local revenues, the reasons that's down is that there's less money going into debt service, so there's less third-party revenues coming in from impact fees. That would be the major changes. That, and because of the investment earnings have gone down considerably from what they were 5 years ago. Fund balance, you can see we've tried to wean the budget off of that. We've gone from a $1.2 million support level down to about $825,000. The fact of life is, though, that we're seeing an overall budget of about a $280,000 or a 0.38% increase per year. So we're not seeing major changes in the budget. We are seeing budgets that are being adjusted downward as a means of trying to address the loss in, particularly the loss in the state revenue. On the municipal program, again, I think it's important to look at the debt services are down. Those will continue to go down over the next few years. Capital budgets have been down. That is more a product of the recessionary periods where we've cut back on the amount of money that we were putting into capital improvements to try to minimize property tax increases. You can also see that the school department's transfers have averaged about $340,000 a year over that 5-year period. What we're seeing is reductions in the size of the school budget as we've seen reductions in the number of students that they are required to educate. Municipal program, we're still looking at under a 2% increase over that 5-year period, and we would hope to be able to project into the future similar trends that we're seeing on this with this trend line. On page 12, I look at the school fund for you just to give you more information, and you can look at the fact that they're losing about $500,000 a year in state aid. So when you've got a $58.6 million budget in the 14-15 year, it's below the 2009-10 expenditures by a full $1 million. So you're 5 years into the program, yet you're $1 million behind. So when you look at the revenues required, property tax increases, even though the budget's gone down, and we've seen a need, even with an average $200,000 a year reduction, we've seen a need for increasing property tax supports for the education program by about $700,000. But again, based on the education aid formula, let me stop for a second. With the education aid formula, we're in the 5th year of the entitlement program being put into place. The program said that South Kingstown was overfunded by the state, and therefore over a 10-year period they were going to reduce the aid to us till we got down to what our effective rate would be under the new formula. So that means that on a yearly basis for the last 4 years, and the 5th year will be the 15-16 year, we'll be losing anywhere between $325,000 and $360,000. We'll also be losing on a per-student basis for any decline in enrollments that occur. So the schools are seeing substantial revenue pressure, and demand is being placed more on self-supporting the budget through property taxes and very little in the way of state aid. A lot of the formula looks at what the relative wealth is of the community and compares that to the overall state, and then uses that as a means of justifying less dollars coming into a presumably richer community than some of the urban areas. On a year-to-year basis, the urban areas are seeing jumps in their education aid, and they're taking the dollars that had been in the municipal budget for the schools and bringing it back into those urban areas. Next page, I wanted to take a look at the tax roll, because I think that people need to understand, where does the money come from that supports the budget? And here it's a case where we're looking at the changes have really been a change in terms of municipal motor vehicle taxes. Excise taxes, the roll was worth $99 million 5 years ago. It's now worth $187 million. So there's a far bigger component coming out of the motor vehicles than there was in prior years. We've also seen a substantial reduction. The state requires revaluation. During the period where we saw a bust in the housing market nationwide, what we saw was a devaluation on the tax rolls. What that meant is, if you look from the 9-10 year to the 14-15 year, there was a reduction of well over $1 billion in taxable property that was lost from the roll on the residential. Similar reductions in commercial and industrial as well. So where we were dealing at one time with $5.1 billion in taxable property, we're now down to $4.1 billion, but we're building again. So it's, the trend is there that we had to do the adjustment, but at the same time, what we're seeing is in the prior year about a $29 million growth in property, taxable property within the community. On the side of this chart, on the right side, I've also shown you what the market value per capita is. So when you look at that, you say, well, what do we have for property in the town? It works out to be about $135,000 in taxable property value for every person that we have in the community, assuming a 32,000 population. That's a good number in terms of what Moody's and investment agencies are looking at for a high bond rating similar to what South Kingstown has. So we've got the proper foundation in place. It's just a question of being able to grow that as we go forward in terms of adding to that, that property tax base. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The page 14, I think the most important thing there is to look at the actual tax levy. And you can see in the 13-14 year, the year before last, the motor vehicle taxes were $3.4 million. They're $3.5 million in the current year, 14-15. And let me make sure everybody's aware, when we show a December of 2013 taxable value, we use December 31 by law as when we establish what the value of property is in town. It's not used for tax purposes until we certify the tax roll on June 15th of the following year. So for the 14-15 year, we're actually using the values from December of 2013. So yes, the levy that you have there at the $67,600,000 is based on taxable property and ownership of motor vehicles as of December 31 of 2013. When you can look at here is that we're at 5% of every tax dollar that comes in is coming through motor vehicles at this point. That is an abnormally high number for us based on what it was just 5 short years ago. If we look at where does the money come from for the tax base, about 82% of all the money comes from the residential base, and about 11% comes from commercial. Industrial and utilities make up the other 1.6%. So when we look at property taxes and we look at its impact, we need to look at the commercial and residential as to how it's going to impact those taxpayers in terms of what it's going to mean to them in terms of the long run as they go forward, because any changes we make is going to have impact on those two property classes. On the preliminary budget guidance, one of the things I've asked the departments to do is to keep service levels at the 14-15 year, if at all possible. We're also looking at salary increases of about 2% in the pro forma budget. Why 2%? We're out of labor contract at this point with 3 of the 4 labor unions that we work with. We will be negotiating for July 1 salaries with the NEA, with Council 94, and with the EMS departments. IBPO, the police department, we still have 1 year left on that contract. And so we're looking at there being a necessity for those types of an increase. And I want to caution, a 2% increase also means that there's going to be step increases or longevity adjustments. Effectively, we're probably in the 3 to 3.2% range if we're giving a 2% general increase for cost of living. And cost of living is at this point at the about a 1.9% level. We're also looking at this point, a placeholder 5% increase in the cost of health care for the 15-16 year. I'd also note schools in their presentation will have a 3%. Both schools and municipal will be looking at that. What we want to see is what our actual incurred costs are for the first 6 months before we come up with final projections on that. I was a bit more conservative than the schools are, but it's not a case where we're in conflict where they're at 3, we're at 5. It's just simply a case that as far as the way the budget performance were being developed. We're also looking at changes in retirement rates of what we have to pay based on actuarial values, and I'll show that in a couple of minutes. But the overall increase that we're going to expect to stand still will be about $80,000. When I say stand still, it means the increase in rates with the same employment base will be up about $80,000. We're also looking at debt service reductions of about $290,000, which is good. We're also looking at about a $27,000 increase based on the capital budget that I've submitted to the council. And again, in balancing the program as we put the pro forma together, we were inputting a 2% increase in the levy transfer to the schools. One change that will affect the municipal side that involves the schools, and Kristen will talk about it later, is we're looking at funding of a second school resource officer that will work in conjunction with the middle school program, as well as providing liaison services with all of our elementary schools. First year cost on that program is about $82,000. It will be shared between the two, the municipal and the schools. The police will pick up half the cost. The schools will pick up the other half of that cost. And we'll talk more directly on that program later tonight. I want to talk about the revenues for a second. The budget's being built assuming that there'll be a $3,000 vehicle exemption. That's something which we have used for the last several years. We're going to also assume that the state's going to maintain the $500 reimbursement per vehicle. We're hopeful that non-property tax revenues will show an increase of between 1 and 2.5%. We're expecting that state aid will continue to be no more than 3.4% of our overall budget, which is alarmingly small. Unassigned fund balance, we'd like to reduce. In the current year, we got $825,000 that comes from fund balance. I'd like to get that down $150,000 more into the $725,000 range, $700,000 range, if at all possible. But we've got to look at what that does as far as the property tax requirements. So we'll balance that out. One of the other things that we're looking at is today I met with the assessor and reviewed the value of taxable increases in the roll so far this year. And we've got about a $22 million growth in taxable property that's been recorded to date. We were estimating somewhere in the area of $30 million. At the same time last year, we were looking at being at around a $29 million figure. So we're tracking about where last year we netted at $29 million. We were tracking at 29 with the exemptions that we have to take out. The net was around 29. So at this point, we could be back down to the 22. So it could be about a $7 million reduction from what we had anticipated when we were starting to put the pro forma together earlier this month in late November. If we have a 0.75, 0.75 increase, or 7/10 of 1% increase, it'll generate about $400,000 in new property tax without touching the tax roll or tax effort that's required by general property taxpayers. But if we're looking at major increases in the overall program, that really isn't going to cover a lot of future costs. On page 17, I've given you a look at the tax roll. I'm not going to spend much time on this. A lot of the information I've given, so it'll be background information that people can use at a later time in evaluating the budget that we put forward. The property tax roll projections, as I was mentioning, we had a 0.75% increase in the current year, which is about $29 million. If we went with the same 0.75, we'd have about 30. At this point, I'm not sure we're going to meet 30. Last year, we saw 4 major subdivisions that were under construction. We'll be looking really at one that will be finishing this year. So we'll be seeing far less new residential growth, and we're not seeing a lot of commercial. There are a couple of projects that could add to that roll, but for the most part, that roll increase that we see in the commercial, on the commercial base, is most likely not going to occur until the 16-17 year. I think there can be some substantial growth at that point in that classification of property, but I don't think that's going to really provide us with great benefit during the 15-16 years. So we're going to have to continue to watch that closely. Obviously, we won't have real good numbers on that until we put the budget out in March. I want to talk about the motor vehicles for a second, because I think that we need to understand what one of the threats to municipal budgets will be this year. Legislative amendments are expected to be introduced in the 2015 year at the General Assembly to revise the motor vehicle assessment values from a clean retail value to a trade-in value. That could be as much as a 20% reduction in the amount of taxable value that you would have on motor vehicles. So if you lost 20%, you'd lose about $37 million in taxable value, or about $700,000 in taxes. To make up that $700,000, you'd either need to cut program by the $700,000, or you would need to raise from the flexible roll about 17 cents. I don't think that the General Assembly would ever take the entire 20% in 1 year. I think that a more reasonable expectation would be that the legislation would go in proposing the 20, and or actually proposing the change from the clean value to a resale value. But I think what would most likely occur would be a step down, where it would probably be a 4 or 5 year period of about 20 or 25% of the value being taken on a yearly basis. It could also be that they put that off until the 16-17 year. But I do think that there is enough concern over motor vehicle tax impacts that we will see some type of legislative change that will require either reductions in the roll value, or there'll have to be reductions in municipal programming, either at the municipal or the school level, because obviously the schools have to be as concerned about the motor vehicle excise tax as the municipal side, because they're getting 76 cents of every dollar that we raise in taxes. So if we lose $700,000, they're losing 76% of that. And I think it's also important, because I think it's been quite gratuitous on some of the discussions on the motor vehicle and the way municipals are overtaxing our municipals. And I think that there needs to be a better story presented. And I want you to look at this chart on page 21. In the 2007 year, we were getting $2.165 million from the state for the $6,000 that were taken off of a vehicle. In 2011, they decided that the $6,000 was going to go down to $500 that they would reimburse us on. So with a stroke of a pen, what had been in place went from 2.16 down to $168,000 and has remained pretty well constant since that time. Even though they went down to $500 in reimbursement, South Kingstown councils over the past 4 years have included the $3,000 value as a reduction. Some communities have stayed at the 500, some have gone as high as 6,000. But you can see what the difference is when you look at the motor vehicle taxable values. When we had it for that 1 year at $500, we had a $219,000 value. When you took that back up to the $3,000, you ended up losing another almost $50 million in taxable property. So there have been impacts. There's been a lot of concern expressed that I think that people didn't see the impact associated with motor vehicles when there was a $6,000 reduction between the difference between clean value and resale value. I think once the $6,000 was lost, I think that's when the concerns became the most severe. The other thing that's important to note on motor vehicles is our rate is $18.71 for motor vehicles. Some of the urban areas have rates as high as $80. So they're using the same tax base, but they're taxing 3 times or 4 times as much. So you can have the same vehicle in South Kingstown and the same vehicle in Providence, identical as far as assessment values, and in Providence it would be 4 times as much for that tax. So there's a lot wrong with the way motor vehicle excise taxes are levied and on what the value is. However, the requirement that any of the requirement changes that occur are going to impact the way any of the municipalities have to address their taxes. It's easy to say, well, if you lose it, then you just cut it out of the program. The question will be, where do you cut those type of dollar amounts, $700,000, if that were the case? I also wanted to say that I've used a 20% in the performer as far as what motor vehicle loss could be. It could be as high as 30%. One of the communities, and I haven't reviewed their statistical database, but they've indicated that they put an analysis together looking at multiple vehicles as to clean versus resale, and that rather than 20%, it could be as high as 30%. So I think there's a lot to be seen on where this legislation goes in the General Assembly, but I think that when it does go forward, the General Assembly is going to need to know what the impact is on the communities and the fact that they're the ones that created the problem in terms of how they slashed the reimbursement program in the first place. So we need to look at that, but we'll have to follow that legislation because it could impact final budget adoption in April. Many times legislation of this nature won't be decided till very late in the General Assembly session. If that's the case, there's a greater anticipation that it'll have less impact on 15-16 and more on 16-17. But if I could forecast that stuff, I'd take a different job, particularly with what the General Assembly is going to do. Performer budget, I looked at the performer budget in terms of saying that we need wages and benefits about 3.5%, services around the 3.5% with the debt program down, and that we'd see about a 1.76% budget increase. One of the things I think is important is everybody looks at this and says, oh, you got a $76.2 million budget that you're forecasting here. The real operational budget that you're forecasting is 21.187, which is the operations program. Everything else is school-related. So when we look at what we're looking at there, 81% of that is tied up in personnel. So when we start looking at what can we do to reduce program, we are looking, just as the schools would be looking, is program reductions mean people reduction or service level reductions. It's not going to be in terms of efficiencies, because if you're only dealing with less than $4 million in discretionary spending in terms of materials and supplies. It's kind of hard to cut electricity or heating fuel. Those things are not going to change. So the only place that you've got flexibility within your overall operations budget would be in the area of your wages and benefits. And certainly that's something we would look at, but we would want to see what direction council would want to push in terms of those type of efforts. If we move on to the next page, page 23, 23 looks at a first estimate of where the revenues would come from. Again, you're showing the 2.2 on the levy increase, but that's going to be, it'll be 2% net, because what we're actually doing is we're going to be reducing some of the overlay as a way of getting that 2% down. So with an overall budget, local revenues, we're looking at around the 2.5% increase. Undesignated funds, I'm still looking at about 150 that we could cut back. But I think that this is the target that we would be looking at. Again, remember, as far as the budget process is concerned, none of the departments have submitted budgets to us at this point. On the municipal side, this is just a forecast based on trending that we've seen over the last 5 years. So the budget that I give you certainly will not exceed the 2% in terms of levy, but how we structure both the expenditure program and the revenue program will be based on highest priority needs being served first where possible. If you look at the page 24 is going to give you an idea as to the appropriation and what the tax distribution will be. It'll still be around 76.24%. And you can see the overlay at the $1,034,000. I wanted to explain that to newcomers. When we look at the overlay really is if you're going to collect, if you need $1 million in property tax, and you're going to send out bills for $1 million, you're not going to collect $1 million. You're going to collect probably 1.3% less than that $1 million. So if you really need the $1 million to get the $1 million, you need to raise 101.3%. So the levy looks, that $1 million that's there, $1,034,000, is made up of three components. One is 1.3% of taxes that won't be paid in the first year in which they come due. The second component is elderly tax abatement program. With our elderly tax abatement program, we take it off the roll. However, the council, as a courtesy, has not closed the roll after June 15th certification. What do I mean by that? I mean that if we have an elderly couple that applies for the elderly tax abatement and they're late in applying, the council's allowed an abatement to take place. Normally, it's around $50,000 more than what goes through the normal program. So we have $50,000 as a set aside there. We also have erroneous tax assessments. Erroneous tax assessments aren't that Gene's doing a bad job. What it is it's a case where a lot of times the vehicles with the registry may be registered in more than one town. So we have to determine where the vehicle is, and if it wasn't in South Kingstown but actually in Saunderstown, then it would go to North Kingstown, then we would have to abate those taxes. We use an adjustment on abatement of about $100,000. So that works out to be $1,034,000 that we raise more in taxes than what we need. But remember that in your revenue statement you had prior year taxes. So the money of that $1,034,000 that you're not collecting in the year in which you put the bill out, you've got it as a revenue in the 16-17 year. So it's not as if that money disappears. It doesn't. It's just collected under a different category in the following year as a prior year tax. So here what we're looking at is what would happen if we had that 2% increase in the tax levy. It would mean that you'd have about a 20-cent property tax increase if the tax roll went up by the $30 million. Again, all of it's qualified in terms of all of the different factors that I've listed so far would have to come true for it to come out exactly to those dollar amounts. But from a pro forma basis, we were looking at an overall tax levy increase would be around 1.335, and about the 2%. Debt service, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. We'll do that in the capital budget. Suffice it to say that we're seeing about a $290,000 reduction in terms of tax effort necessity in 15, 16. That'll service both school and municipal debt. The page 26 just provides an explanation as to where state aid to the general fund has been over the past several years, so that you can get an idea as to how decisions at the state level have profound impact on the municipal level. You know, it's disappointing to hear on how high property taxes are from state officials, when in fact a great deal of our problem is that there is not the revenue sharing. Think of the fact that all of the money that is paid in income tax and sales tax that's generated in South Kingstown goes to Providence, and only a very small portion of that's coming back in terms of education aid or municipal aid. As you can see, general municipal aid for the year, we're looking at about $1.35 million. So you're still looking at less than 4%, about a 3.4% budget support from the state. That's where we have problems with the property tax. We can agree that there may be program needs that need to be adjusted across the state. We can agree that that labor contracts are very expensive. But what we have to look at is, if there isn't the intergovernmental revenue sharing based on the tax dollars that are being paid by our residents, then we're certainly being shortchanged in terms of the overall process. And I think it's something that our legislators really have to have a better working knowledge of, because I think a lot of them think, well, the cities and towns just aren't doing a good job. I think that there's another story that can be told when you look at the actual numbers. State aid, just a chart on page 27. This is somewhat therapy for me to put those charts together. The capital budget's on page 28. Again, we'll talk about that in January. The next page, 29, provides an idea as to what are we faced with in terms of our retirement system and the municipal employer contribution rates. And you can see that for every dollar that we spend for the police department on salaries or longevity, we're giving 24.71 cents for every dollar. That's what our contribution requirement is at this point for the 2015-16 year. For the general municipal employees, it's 12.25%. That's 11.25% for the general retirement program and 1% for the 401 plan, that hybrid system that was put in 2 years ago. For EMS, it's only 5.34 cents per dollar on income for the salary. So we're looking at, if those salaries are the proper estimates, and again, those need to be verified, we're looking at around $76,000 to $80,000 to stand still based on the increased rates that are set in place for the municipal retirement system. The chart that's on page 30, I think, is important for folks to understand. A great deal has been said over the past 3 years about the state retirement system and the unfunded liability. And I want it clear that municipal retirement systems are independent of the state system. They are managed through the state retirement system, but they have their own assets and they have their own liabilities. On a yearly basis, the assets are defined and the liabilities are defined. South Kingstown has 3 separate retirement plans. The first plan is for police. It has assets of $21.2 million, and it has liabilities of $27.7 million. So it is 76.4% funded. The EMS program is funded at 122%. A lot of the reason there is because there's been a lot of turnover in that program, and it's a very young program. Program has only been in place for about 18 years. The municipal program, which includes all non-police EMS, is at 49.5 in assets and 54.7 in liability. This includes all the non-teacher, non-certified people in the school department as well. So when you look at municipal, it's the municipal and it's the non-teachers that are also in that same retirement system. And that's 90.5% funded. So overall, as of June 30 of 2014, South Kingstown's retirement systems are 93.1% funded. There's been an awful lot said about the cities and towns that have got private retirement systems. We do not have any private retirement systems. We have joined through the MERS program at the state level. They manage the money through the Treasurer's office. However, any of the liabilities that they have for state employees, any of the liabilities that they have associated with state police or for state employees, those are separate plans. You also see on this chart that what your average number of employees are by each of the groups, and you can see that total membership of people that are in our retirement system at this point over the three systems are about 375 people. Their average age is 43, and they've got about 11.6 years of service at a $42,000 salary. So we are in a very good position as far as pensions are concerned. I'd like to see the police at a higher rate. However, again, looking at statutory requirements in terms of what we have to do within our labor contracts is providing these type of major costs in terms of disability retirements that we're seeing on a year-in, year-out basis. Now, recognize that the 93.1% is as of 2014. If you look at 2012, you see that it was 86.3% funded. In November of 2011, the General Assembly passed the Reform Act for retirement systems. It provided for longer employment requirements for people to be able to attain retirement age, and it also reduced COLA provisions. It's under litigation at this point, and I think everybody at the table is aware that were the unions to prevail in their attack on that legislation, that the 93% that we have would be diminished. Would it go down to the 86% level? Most likely, yes. But I think that what we're still looking at is that even if that act hadn't been passed, from a South Kingstown perspective on local plans, we would still be in a viable position. However, what we would see is the retirement contribution rates in future years skyrocket, because it would have to make up for the 3 years of underfunding that occurred if there was a retroactivity back to the 2011 actuarial assumptions that were being used and benefit levels that were being provided. So, I mean, the best of all worlds would be to see a settlement between the parties rather than to play Russian roulette and one side wins and one side loses for the better interest, because many of the communities are not in as good a shape as South Kingstown, and it could potentially put a number of communities into a bankruptcy perspective. So, and the thing that does is it means that people may not get their retirements. So understand we are in good shape. We will, however, have to stand the test of that litigation that's going on, and it will have impact were it to adversely go against the General Assembly's legislative changes. But for now, you're looking at, based on the liability statement that you got before you tonight, will be voted on by the retirement board on Wednesday of this week. These are the numbers that are being presented to them for South Kingstown. I wish I could say that the school teachers, which is a statewide system, is in great shape. It isn't. I think the last funding ratio is probably in the 56 to 58% funded level. So I think that there's still a good deal of work that's going to need to be done in terms of getting that up to about a 70% level where it needs to be. How that's going to be done is yet to be seen. I think what they're looking at is that if investment yields continue to exceed the 7.25%, that the assets will escalate. They're also looking at, is there a reasonable expectation that instead of 7%, it could go to 7.25 or 7.3, which would, on paper, reduce the exposure. I'm not going to get involved with that other than to say that the school teachers, which is a statewide system, South Kingstown unfortunately doesn't get to have its own teacher plan, as they do for police and EMS and municipal employees. They're part of an overall state system which is underfunded at this point substantially. Right now, the rates for certified teachers will go to about it's a 60-40 split. Their overall contributions in at 23.14 for next year, and the town side or the school's operating budget will have to come up with 13.73%. So even just using some of their older numbers, it could be as much as $160,000 in cost that they will need just to stand still with the existing workforce. So retirement is an important component of the budget, and one that can be affected downward if, in fact, you reduce your employment base. Last couple of slides, undesignated fund balance. I'm showing you the 13-14 year. We had a large surplus. We also had a transfer to the technology fund of $250,000, and we supported $825 for the 14-15 year. So we netted out where, at the end of the fiscal year 2014, we were at 10.266. With a placeholder of $500,000 on the 14-15 year, and with Trish holding court, I'm sure the 500 will be there. We're looking at having the $1 million for the community rec center transfer, as well as the $750 that I'm forecasting for the 15-16 year support, and we would still end up at about 11.8%, which is viable and certainly something that we will not have difficulty with Moody's on. The closer we can get to getting undesignated funds out as a revenue in the operating budget, the better off I think that our rating agencies would look at us. And rating agencies are important for us to keep in mind, since we've got about $10.5 million in bonds that will be put over the next 4 years into permanent financing. They look not that these dollars coming in, the less amount the better, because they want to see that you're generating enough dollars to equal your expenses, rather than using saved dollars to be able to meet your operating expenses. When we look at the undesignated fund balance on 33, this is just a chart that takes a double look. It looks both at where have we been in terms of cash value, and where have we been as far as percentage value of the operating budget. Because what we look at is we want to know what's the percent that we have in hand equal to at least 60 days of what our budget will be for the following year. Slide on page 34 is really a historic perspective in terms of a lot of people think that we've given a great deal of salary increases. What we wanted to do is to show, going back several years, what the increases have been in each of the different units that we service, as well as to point out that co-share at this point, we're building the performer on 20% for co-share. At this point, all of our unions but NEA are in a position for July 1st for the 20%, with a couple of exceptions as far as individuals making under $30,000. And what I'm also providing here is what's the cost to the town in terms of health care and retirement. So you see each of those notes. So EMS employees, if they retire after 20 years, for 3 years, would get a stipend equal to $1,333 and so forth. Note number 2, as far as the Council 94, they would get the same benefits for anybody hired after 2005. And note number 3, for non-organized and NNEA, we're looking at the same type of a stipend. Rather than providing full health care benefits in retirement till age 65, the only group that we really have that with is the police department at this point. It's certainly a subject of negotiation on a yearly basis. However, the only union here, other than the police, that have binding arbitration are EMS. So while EMS doesn't enjoy that benefit at this point, this is a benefit that is got great cost associated with it. We don't anticipate giving it, but I'm showing you from a historic perspective what have we given in the past and where do we stand going forward into 15, 16. As you can tell, it's a short presentation for me. Normally I go on a lot longer, but seeing that the schools wanted to have 65 slides, I cut a couple of mine out. If there's any questions on any of the slides or information that I've provided, I certainly would be glad to answer any questions at this point. If there aren't any questions, I would suggest that we turn the program over to Kristen for the school presentation.
Any questions? No. Kristen, please commence.
Give me a sec.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us this evening. To my left, I would like to introduce you to our new CFO. This is Mary Ann Crawford. She replaces John Rashat, who is very mean and retired on us. We welcome Mary Ann to our first. This is lovely. Thank you.
That's what floated away during Hurricane Sandy.
You can advance to the next one if you don't
Hold
mind.
on a second.
Certainly.
We're not as fast as the school department.
So typically, I try to provide 3 buckets of information. One is our strategic planning efforts. Another bucket is our demographic and achievement data, and then we get into the budget data. Next. I don't have control of my own area, so if you hear me say next, I apologize. Oh, yes, now I do. Look how quickly that got taken care of.
You don't have wireless?
Oh, thank you. So usually I try to ground myself in a little bit of educational research, and Elmore says that there are really only 3 ways to improve the instructional core, and that is you can raise the level of content that students are exposed to. Oh, there we go. No, I got it. I'm good. You can increase the skill and knowledge that teachers bring to the teaching of that content. We would know that to be professional development, or you can increase the level of that student active learning of the content, and that's really it. I've put up the mission of our school department to ground our discussions. And we, as a school department, do what's called a theory of action, which is really taking the mission and the belief system, the vision, and putting those assumptions into a mental map that really connects all points of the organization, the instructional strategies, and the intended results. In our theory of action, or TOA, it brings us district coherence and focus. It connects all the dots between the programs and all of the schools, and it points to a strategic direction that aligns all of the structures with the resources that are necessary to provide for those structures. And one of the educational researchers, Kim, says the more clearly that you can articulate your organization's theories about what leads to success, the more deliberate you can be about investing in the elements that are critical to that success. Early in my career here, and this is my 6th year as your superintendent, I've been honored to serve in this wonderful community. we read as a leadership team Jim Collins' Good to Great. And it's pretty well known that good is the enemy of great. So if you ever wanted to be great and you're good, then that can get in the way. But if you're really struggling, then it's easy to put really, champion efforts to get to be great. And the hedgehog is a sort of symbolic of identifying some sort of unifying concept that you can believe in as an organization. Confront the brutal facts, but never lose faith. And determine what you're deeply passionate about and create this visual. So our visual is the key is me. And this really has identified to the entire educational community a need to take personal responsibility for the education of all students. And we have so many wonderful educators that do that each and every day that as a part of our communication plan, we have celebrated these wonderful educators with nominations, and they receive accolades, and they get to hear about how they've personally impacted children and colleagues in the district. We're in the 5th year of our strategic plan. We chime off of the state strategic planning structure, which is a 5-year plan, so we're wrapping up. And 5 years ago, these are the things that we found to be instructional priorities, and they seemed so far away to us 5 years ago. And I'm happy to report that we have realized each component. So ensuring that all students have access to the regular education curriculum was not in place 5 years ago. Ensuring that we had instructional rigor and best practiced instruction in areas like reading workshop, math workshop, a preschool, alternative high school, world language access, Algebra 1 early access, and ensuring that all students are propelling forward. And we've realized those features through differentiated instruction, a response to intervention, which is the state requirement, and specialized leadership in what we call STEM. And we are a world of acronyms in public education. So I've done my best to unacronym us, but if you catch me with one, please feel free to ask. But STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math, and of course, reading is reading. So when we take a look at our district demographics, we have had a relative we have had the same level of English language learner population since 2009. We have approximately 25 English language learners speaking about 7 different languages, and they are sprinkled throughout the district. We are a low incidence ELL population, and our ELL population is pretty unique in that we are not finding that a lot of youngsters were born here and have been educated for 10 or 15 years in the system as some urban areas have. We're finding a lot of our English language learners come from the University of Rhode Island, so they're very literate in their primary or home language. In terms of free and reduced lunch, that's how we measure poverty in public education, and we're noticing an uptick in poverty. In 2009, 13% of our population qualified for a free and reduced lunch, and now in 2014, it's 19%, which seems really significant. The state is 47%. And so compared to the state, it's not as significant, but it certainly is significant for us. In terms of our special populations, we were, in 2009, 18% of our students were receiving special education service supports, and now in 2014, 12% of our students receive special education supports, meaning that they spent a majority of their time in the regular education classroom. State of Rhode Island average is 15%, and the nation is 12.9%. And then I took the liberty, and again, I'm certainly not going to go through every slide either, although I know you're dying for me too. I'm going to refrain. I do identify by poverty rate by school and take you through 2011 to 2014, and highlighted in red is where schools that have highlighted as above average district poverty and average district special education. Oh, I'm sorry. I promise you I'm clicking it. There we go. I apologize. And so you're looking at, in terms of the highest poverty schools, our Title I schools, which are our highest poverty elementary schools, are West Kingston with 24% poverty and Peacedale with 21% poverty. Matunic has the least amount of poverty in our community. And Broad Rock and Curtis Corner, where all of these children from all 4 schools come together, are still bringing in 19 to 20% poverty. It's not unusual for the high school, even though all students are together, to experience a little lower than what you'd see the same cohort of students at qualifying for in middle school as a lower amount. Unfortunately, you see at the high school level, sometimes students are not either filling out the forms or not applying for free and reduced lunch or not eating their lunch. We have a really wonderful food service program and a food service coordinator who they do their very best to identify youngsters and let them know this is anonymous and this is free and you're entitled to it. But that's why you might see the high school not in the 19 to 20% range. In terms of special education, you're seeing our highest special education rate at West Kingston, and then Peacedale, and then Matunic. This is our high school graduation data, and just to remind ourselves that the way the Rhode Island Department of Education defines high school graduation, it's a 4-year cohort. So they take a look at the children who were in our 9th grade cohort and see where they are as 12th graders. And so taking a 5th year would count for this slide in terms of not a graduate, even though they do graduate on time. So in 2009, we had an 86% graduation rate. It dropped to 80% in 2012 and 89.7% in 2013. We obviously know how many students graduated in 2014, but RIDE does their own calculation of our data, and they don't give it back to us official until probably about a month from now. Early reports show it's even higher than the 89.7, which is really, really wonderful. And a lot of effort has gone into that graduation rate on the part of our high school faculty and staff. The Rhode Island average is 79.7 graduating in 4 years. And this is what our high school, your mouse does not like me. This is what our high school graduation rate looks like in a bar graph. You get to be in charge of that because I think I'm better off with having Steve do it.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Just to interject, and I apologize.
No, please feel free to ask questions as you go.
Does that graduation rate include the children that are homeschooled as well?
Homeschool students are not eligible for a diploma. And so if they enter back in, then they become eligible again into the diploma system. Sure. Then I'm going to show you some statistics, and this is sort of a slide to say that a 1-year positive or negative trend, it's not really a trend, it's really a bubble, is not what we really look at. We're looking at a 3 to 5 year trend as celebrating good news, or 3 to 5 year trend as experiencing some significant concern. We also try to dig deeper inside of the statistics to say, why is there a dip? Is it an implementation dip? Are we starting with a brand new program? Is what could be causing a rise? Is it a quick fix strategy, or is it a really strategic, results-driven, long-term initiative? And so when we take a look at SAT scores, we have always been significantly above the state and nation, but if you're someone who works with SAT scores, they're hard to change. And so the next slide will show you that we have seen some increase in especially our math and writing SAT scores. This is directly from College Board, and it's important to note that in March of 2014, the SAT revealed that the SAT is going to be changed again in 2016. But right now, we're doing well with our SATs. AP exams has always been a source of great pride for our community. Our teachers and students work very, very hard in all areas of the advanced placement program in terms of the number of exams taken, the number of students who are taking those exams, the exams scored at the college mastery level, and the percent of exams scored at College Mastery. So this first slide shows you an example of, in numbers, we were again awarded the AP District Honor Roll. But the second graph, I think, is even more, see, it doesn't like you either, Marianne. That makes me feel so much better about myself. South Kingstown schools were selected for the 4th annual AP District Honor Roll. 477 school districts across the U.S. and Canada were honored by College Board for, and this is important, simultaneously increasing access to AP, which means offering more AP courses, while also maintaining or increasing the number of students or the percentage of students earning scores which are college-level mastery of 3 or higher on the exams. 4 districts in Rhode Island met the criteria to be placed on the honor roll this year, and South Kingstown High School is the only high school in the state who was honored for multiple years. And so, you know, once you add another new course and a new exam, the likelihood is we won't do as well on that one. That's not the case in South Kingstown. They do very, very well. In terms of the student achievement test, it's important to note that the General Assembly in the last legislative session has discontinued the NECAP as a use for graduating high school, and therefore the NECAP itself has been eliminated. The only point of giving it this year would be to give feedback towards graduation, because we're not teaching toward the NECAP. We're not teaching the GLEs and GSEs, the grade level and grade span expectations any longer. We have been for several years teaching the Common Core state standards, which will be measured by a new assessment system piloted last year, but actually being administered this year, called the PARC. So we're in a bit of a transition time. This is our high school NECAP scores from 2007 to 14. So you're seeing, and you're going to look for sort of like an uptick or a down ladder or an up ladder, and you're seeing an up ladder in math, reading, and writing, and you're seeing what I would call a bit of a plateau in science. Science scores will likely be released tomorrow. Those were embargoed for a while, and they're experiencing a little bit of difficulty with the science assessment to be tuned in. But you know, this is good news for us overall. We chose high school data because that's really it's our flagship. It's where all students will eventually land, and so you know, this is some significant data. And what are we looking at? Because it's great to celebrate, and I do love to celebrate, and certainly let our families and staff know how hard everybody's working in the best interest of children. But a big part of our planning is about what do we still need to do better. And what we identified at our school committee retreat this summer is something that, quite frankly, we've been working on for a very, very long time, earlier than I arrived here, which is our achievement gap for students with disabilities, our achievement gap for economically disadvantaged youth, and chronically absent and tardy data. And then some of the, I've also noted the STAR assessment, differentiated instruction, self-paced and personal learning as attempts to combat those pieces. So this is a pretty heavy thinking slide. This shows you at grade 11, 8, and 4th in reading and math, when we look at the first category of students without disabilities, what it actually says is, and I'll give you grade 11 math, of all the students without disabilities in grade 11 when tested in math, 67% of those students are testing at or above the state standard, and 33% are testing below. But in red, I've highlighted for you some of the concerning data, which is of the students with disabilities category, only 3% of our students in 11th grade who have been identified in need of special education support are achieving at or above state standard, and 97 below. Now, the Rhode Island Department of Education identifies that a 15-point gap between the two categories is considered an achievement gap. And the idea is to close the achievement gap. And typically with specialized instruction, training, or support programs, you're able to really close in on that gap. The gap is identified at the bottom. Our largest gap for students with disabilities is at 8th grade math, where we have an 80-point gap difference. I put in the bottom in blue the narrative. If you go back at this and you say, now wait a minute, 88 plus 12 is 100, but 88 and 33 is not 100. It's not supposed to be. So it'll make sense later on when you're rereading it if you read the blue narrative at the bottom. The next chart is our students in poverty gap. Again, 15% means that we have a gap. You shouldn't have a gap. The idea of special education is that you are providing specialized support, experts in the field, to make sure that that gap closes, and you're exited from special education when your gap is closed. And there are programs that are federally funded called Title I that help to make certain that there are reading specialist math initiative programs in the schools to close that poverty gap. So in our schools, you can see that grade 11 math is our largest, is our highest area of significance, where only 32% of students in grade 11 in poverty are achieving at state standards. And our largest gap is in, again, grade 8 math, which is a 40% gap. And then at the school committee meeting, because I try out these slides on the school committee before I bring them to you, and at the school committee meeting, they said, well, if I were the town council, I might want to know what you are all doing to close that gap. And so we have about 5 pages worth of slides, and I cut back, telling you what's been done very recently in the last 2 to 3 years in order to close those gaps. So I won't go through them, but there's a significant amount of training, screening and assessment data, universal screenings, and then diagnostic assessments, so we know where to focus the teaching, where to target those interventions, and what our instructional changes have looked like, including response to intervention, which is required, our access to high-quality preschool, a lot of support for intervention blocks and attendance. We've done social-emotional survey pilots. We have a bridge program from preschool to kindergarten that we implemented this year. We've redesigned the elementary summer school. It's Title I Poverty Funds Summer School for targeted interventions in reading. We redesigned the middle school summer school program focused on closing gaps. We have started a high school summer school program for the first time in quite some time. And that came from our last negotiations. We have after-school math interventions in grades 3 through 8, a high school Saturday school for credit recovery, a pilot program that we're starting now in January for credit recovery at the high school from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. This slide shows another area that we're working on, which is our chronic absenteeism data, and this shows how we're doing relative to the state. And we're seeing some significant work. If you look at the chronic absenteeism slide that's depicted in, it's either pink or orange, Broad Rock Middle School had tried out some really significant chronic absenteeism pilot programs, and they're really seeing a lot of a good progress there. And so we're now taking that work, and we're working at every leadership team meeting, so it's every 2 weeks, with the data from the other schools. We also are now accurately measuring excused, unexcused, tardy, and early dismiss, and communicating that information to parents on Skyward, knowing that parents are, of course, our first partners, and if they know, what the data is looking like, they're not always driving their little ones to and from school. It might be a caregiver. They might be driving themselves, as mine do. And you're not certain that they're getting to school at the time that they're telling you. We also have instituted a positive attendance campaign in the elementary schools, showcasing for parents that there's a significant correlation between your child coming to school every day, even in kindergarten and first grade, and college entrance, and then success coming to work with fidelity in the workforce. We're instituting a lot of personalization techniques, greeting the children, meeting with the children, and saying to them, now, what happened today? Why were you late today? And really addressing from a qualitative perspective on the child to guidance counselor or child to teacher level. We're in partnership with the Washington County Coalition for Children and other Southern Rhode Island districts on chronic absenteeism and youth mental health. We're doing some significant grant writing, and we're just awarded a sizable youth mental health grant. And we have partnership with Gateway and South County Hospital in order to partner for youth mental health initiatives as well. This is a list of current areas of innovation, and I've gone through some of them for you, but to highlight just a few, we have a partnership that's in its, I think it's third or fourth year, with Columbia University Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. I think we're the only school department in the state to do this work, where fellows from Columbia come here and work with our teachers, and our teachers go to Columbia to learn the latest best practice research in reading, and that's K through 8 and a program at the high school. We also have really invested in transportation subcommittee. We are one of the largest land masses in Rhode Island. We have we have a significant contribution in our budget to transportation, and we put forth a lot of effort, school committee members, members of the community, and school department staff, to look at ways that we could try to save money in the area of transportation budget, while of course not compromising on safety. And one of the areas that was very unique that we invested in, and it wasn't a monetary investment, it was actually, it was free to us to pilot, is sensors that are put on the high school buses in addition to the bus monitors, to try out this way of knowing if anything is under the bus, preventing the bus from moving forward safely. Sensors will go off to cause the bus driver to go off the bus and see what's going on. And we took a look at this to make sure we're out in front in terms of our safety initiatives. We have done a lot of, sorry.
Is that going forward to replace the bus monitors in the future, or just to?
There hasn't been any talk
Add to.
about replacing the bus monitors in the future. I think that they would have liked to have studied it for a while to see what the next steps would be. And we're very early in taking a look at this added feature. But they have at the legislative level mentioned it to our legislators so that they're aware of it, because bus monitors roughly, I'm going to say, are about $300,000 in our budget. And are there ways that we can be even safer than that? But there hasn't been any action taken that I know of beyond that.
Safer than, are there any ways we can be safer than the bus monitor?
Right, so in this case,
technology.
bus monitors aren't required on the high school level.
Right.
And so we have implemented these on the high school buses. Sure. So we heard a lot about credit recovery for youngsters who were in jeopardy of not graduating, and we wanted to make certain we were offering that same support to youngsters who are aspiring to go to Ivy League colleges and universities. So we did a pilot last year for credit expansion, an 8th period. Our high school students take 7 periods. Very small pilot for accelerated students who are identified by their guidance counselor and one of the assistant principals, and they're taking courses that are not offered at our comprehensive high school: Mandarin, Latin, forensics, oceanography. We also have gone through with our preschool program the RIDE accreditation process, and we've offered a full day, one full day section for youngsters who would be eligible for preschool, but they're not quite, for kindergarten, but they're not quite ready for kindergarten. And we've invested in that program based on feedback from our parents and our preschool teachers. We were, up until last year, one of the only, if not the only, school department in the southern part of the state who did not have a grade 8 world language program. And so we surveyed parents and said, is this something you'd like us to explore? Overwhelmingly, yes. If this is something you'd like us to explore, what language would you like us to explore? Overwhelming Spanish and second choice French. So we started a grade 8 world language program last year at Curtis Corner. And this year, the parents, the teachers, and the principal are taking a look at, you know, is there a need to expand that to grade 7? And as I've added in the slides, the next progression, if they did add to grade 7, is, and what will it look like in grade 6, if any? Maybe a culture offering that parents can elect to participate in for their children in grade 6. You'll hear a little bit more about dual language immersion soon, but we also are one of the first public schools that are taking a look at an international baccalaureate program, which is beyond AP. So it's for youngsters, so it goes typical, honors, AP, IB. And we have a cadre of parents and teachers at the high school that are very interested in taking a look at that work, because we have students that can access that level of instruction.
I just wanted to ask you about the credit expansion program. Is that online? Is that how
Yes,
you're doing that?
it's through Virtual High School.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Sure.
So every year since the Rhode Island Educator Evaluation System has been in process, I've been asked in this arena, you know, well, how are we doing? What's it look like compared to the state? And so I gave you a slide. RIDE doesn't report on their website the gradual implementation year, which is the 11-12 year, but you're looking at, you know, roughly, you know, 56% highly effective, 41% effective, 1.3% of the state developing, and then 0.4% ineffective. And then I've given you on the right-hand side the calculations for about how many teachers in the state that looks like. And then our numbers. So 47.5, or approximately 132 teachers rated as highly effective, and so on and so forth. So we have an absolutely fabulous cadre of teachers working in South Kingstown, but I think you knew that already. And then the last bucket is really what are the general goals of the 15-16 budget preparation. And so in that area, we talk about budget parameters, pension rates, federal grants, charter school enrollments, district FTEs versus enrollment, the funding formula, which is state aid, UCOA, which is the Uniform Chart of Accounts information that is collected statewide, where we can take a look at what others are spending and if we're spending above or below the state average, what revenue assumptions we're planning on, expenditure assumptions, our pro forma estimates, and then 3 new programs that we're hoping to offer in fiscal year 2016. That should say 2016, or it could be 2106. So in terms of the pension trend projected, we're seeing an uptick now back to almost the certified rate being as high as it's ever been, 14.33%, and non-certified rate 12.25%. As the manager alluded to, there's a potential for pension litigation settlement during this fiscal year, which may impact this projection. In terms of the federal aid, we actually, in May, write what's called the Consolidated Resource Plan. It was like the most terrific thing, moving from assistant superintendent to superintendent, because there's 12 years as an assistant superintendent in East Providence and Scituate. My whole month of May was writing the CRP, which wasn't the most thrilling thing you can imagine. We are looking at last year we lost roughly about $300,000 in federal aid too, so it's not just the state that seems to be up against us at this point, it's also the feds. Of course, we are projecting 6 months earlier than, you know, when we know the federal government will put forth their grants, so projected is unknown till July of 2015. This is how we spend our money. A large piece of it, and Title I is it's disadvantaged funds. Title II has had a number of different names. It started out as Eisenhower funds when we wanted to be the first to put like a spaceship on the moon, and then it went to investing in what's called teacher quality programs. So it can be some support for professional development. Title IV is usually innovative programs. Title III, which isn't even up there, is ELL support. We don't get a lot of money for ELL support. IDEA is special education support. And the good news is when students are able to access the general education program fully, then their gap is closed. But the bad news is then we're not receiving federal funds to support those students. And then preschool is preschool funds. The next slide is charter school enrollments. So we've been tracking them since 2004. Our high was in 2006 when we had 153 youngsters attending charter schools, and now this year we're at 76. So it's the lowest we've ever been. I tried to capture for you over the last 3 years, 2012 to now, what it's looked like. And our children go to the Compass School, where we've actually had an uptick to 32 students there. The Green School, which is a high school on the Alton Jones campus in West Greenwich, and we're at 6 students there. We've lost 3. Kingston Hill Academy lost 15 this year, and we're down to 36 students there. 1 student at the Rhode Island Middle Nurses College, Rhode Island Nursing Institute Middle College, and then 1 student at the Village Green School, which is a virtual school. This slide is our enrollment decline versus FTE decline. So we've been charting since 08-09, where we had 3,591 students and 589.6 FTEs. Now those don't necessarily account to persons, because we have some staff members who are applied as part-time, in a part-time capacity. So we are looking at, over the last several years, down 270 students in enrollment and down 97.68 FTEs, and that has not been without great sacrifice to our district. So our net change in enrollment has been down 7%, and down 16% in terms of staff members, and that's from every group, from maintenance, custodian, teacher assistants, administrators, and teachers. Our state aid trend has been largely to blame for the slide previous. So we've seen significant shrink in how much the state is supporting our budget. It's the lowest ever. At one point in 1996, the state was contributing 28.9% of our budget, and now 12%. And we are, as the manager alluded to, in year 5 of the funding formula. So now, enrollment and RIDE data is a funny thing. What I bring off is what's the most current information today on the RIDE website. And so South Kingstown per pupil expenditure is showing on the RIDE website as $18,035, and how you determine that is the overall operating budget divided by the number of students that we have. And it was $17,668. So it continues to amaze me that our per pupil continues to inch up, even though we are making drastic cuts since the funding formula has been put into existence. We're still the 8th highest public school district in Rhode Island. The Rhode Island average per pupil spending is $15,740. That's why one of the reasons that RIDE continually tells us that we're has been overspending for I guess years and years previous. But there are a lot of considerations that you have to take into account when you're looking at this data. Data is only as good as the story behind it. So we want lower class sizes. We don't want, my daughter's a teacher in Pawtucket, and the class size is 30, and my daughter teaches 2nd grade. And so we don't want class sizes that are that high. We believe that in small class size and adult to child ratio, we have a number of schools, and Some school departments have closed schools. We've not wanted to do that. That's not been the will of the community. The community has invested in neighborhood school concept. There are other pieces, post-employment benefits, economies of scale, contractual obligations, the programs and activities that we offer to our children, the caseloads of special educators, the caseloads of specialists, and so those are all to be taken into consideration when you take a look at this data.
Kristen, can I ask a question, please?
Certainly.
I can hear you, but I can't see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. One of your considerations is the number of buildings. So
Yes.
I'm just curious if your capital improvements are included in this calculation.
Yes.
It is.
Yes, so when the, I'm not remembering what the study was that came out last year from the governor's office, the schoolhouse report. So in the schoolhouse report, they took a look at how many buildings, how many square feet, how many empty classrooms there are, every single school department in the state of Rhode Island, and if folks could consolidate. And they took a look at districts to determine if, like the Aquidneck Island study, could all of Aquidneck Island become one regionalized school district? And so there's a lot, if you haven't taken a look at that report, there is a lot of information in there. But you'll see in some of the slides that it looks like we have more teachers or principals. It's not that we have, we do have more principals than a couple of our neighboring schools, but it's because we have more schools than they have.
But I guess what I'm driving at is it's not just maintenance. Also the capital improvements. If it needs a roof, those numbers are figured in here?
When you say in
Into your
here,
cost per pupil?
yes.
For capital, yes. If
Yeah.
it's a bonding, no. The bonding's on the town side.
Right. Sure.
Just, if I could just mention, because we also have the full day K as another piece of it, where a lot of districts don't.
To my knowledge, there's only about 7 districts currently that don't have all-day K anymore.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
So this next slide shows the per pupil expenditure, and we have identified several years ago cohort districts that are like us in terms of demographics and in terms of size. And then we've added to that East Greenwich and Barrington because they are the two highest performing school districts in the state in terms of test scores, and so the accountability subcommittee looked to add those. So when you see the blue stripes, that's why they've been highlighted. And South Kingstown, we're in pink. So when we look at the per pupil expenditure from highest to lowest, the folks that are spending more than we are like Block Island and Little Compton and Jamestown, which are not similar to us. Newport, Exeter, West Greenwich, and one of the big features in Exeter, West Greenwich's per pupil expenditure is their bonds for new buildings, so their debt ratio, and Narragansett and Westerly. And then you'll see that the rest of us, the rest of our cohorts are below us. Barrington, always, I've sent people to Barrington for years to try to figure out, what do they invest in to get such a big bang for their buck. And Cumberland has, I think, been the lowest per pupil expenditure for years, and their high school right now is doing some absolutely fabulous work. Then I took a look at per pupil expenditure by number of schools, because we're starting to become or we always have been, one of the largest in terms of the number of schools that we have. So, Providence, Warwick, and Cranston, you sort of pull them right out because they're really gigantic compared to us. Then we're Pawtucket, East Providence, Woonsocket, North Providence, and Cumberland, and we're now have the largest or the most amount of schools of our cohort districts. The next slide is really was quite sobering to me because I was here when the funding, I think I got hired, the commissioner got hired, the funding formula, it was like the really a wonderful welcome present to South Kingston. I think people thought I brought the funding formula at one point. And at that point, it seemed to be a 50-50 share. It seemed like there were districts that were losing and there were districts that were winning. And when I looked at this a few weekends ago, the people in red are getting less state aid. So we're Newport, us, Middletown, North Kingstown, and Portsmouth. yeah, not looking like half anymore. The folks in yellow are regional school districts, and they're in a really different predicament. They are losing, but they're also losing because they're not getting their regional bonus. So when they were enticed to become regionalized, they were given an incentive to regionalize. And so the funding formula pretty much said to them, okay, you've benefited from the economies of scale for quite some time. You now only have one high school. You've now, dropped some of your fleet, and therefore the regional bonus is gone. And then over the next few slides that I won't go into is how if you add up this district, you will get to our $18,000 per pupil expenditure. And so where it says things like zero, it doesn't really mean zero. It was just insignificant to put into the 18,000. And I've highlighted in pink those areas where the state would tell us we're spending more than the state average. So so instructional materials, we spend out of our per pupil 250, whereas statewide they spend 189. Paraprofessionals, this would be teacher assistants, instructional teachers, but again, we have more teachers because for one of the reasons is we have a lower class size, which is beneficial. We don't want to lose that. Technology and software, 22 versus 166. So you get the picture, right? So this is the strand by instruction, and then instructional support, instructional support continued. We have, in terms of medical, we're proud to have a school nurse teacher in every building. That's not the case in every school in the state. We're spending a bit more for therapists, psychologists, et cetera. We have, in the principal category in the school office, it's a bit higher. And in terms of operations, data processing, transportation is significantly higher. And I think the last page is other commitments, public parochial charter. We have 2 charter schools in our town, and so that the likelihood that youngsters would pick charter instead of coming from a town that didn't have charter or parochials in their backyard is just a little bit higher than statewide. Other retiree benefits, we certainly don't have a plethora of other post-employment benefits, but we're a little bit higher than the state average. In terms of revenue assumptions, this is the 5th year in the funding formula. We are also projecting student enrollment decline over the last 3 or 4 years. I've been working with teachers and administrators to try to combat that by offering just the most wonderful public education choice that we can imagine. And so our goal is if students are born in and they live in South Kingstown, we hope that they choose us. We hope that they choose public school. Group home aid is estimated to be included, but it's important to note 2 things. One, it's not a part of the funding formula, so it's not automatically included. Every year when the school committee speaks with the legislators, they remind them that it's really important that we receive group home aid because we have group homes in South Kingstown that educate children from all over the state, and it's our responsibility and pleasure to educate these children. But the amount of money that we receive from the Department of Ed does not even cover the cost to the town. To not receive anything would just be devastating. We are, as the manager alluded to, we're planning for a 2% property tax transfer to schools. It's just a benchmarker. It's somewhere to start. It gives us, we're able to take a look at what our budget will look like compared to that. We are also, as the manager said, trying to wean our budget off of using the fund balance as revenue. So we're estimating 10% of the fund balance applied as revenue this year. We, years ago, received about $800,000 in Medicaid reimbursement. Just as the other federal aid has dropped, our reimbursement for Medicare has dropped. We're projecting to see about $525,000 in Medicaid. Did I say Medicare? Sorry, Medicaid. In terms of our expenditure assumptions, we have 2 collective bargaining units that are currently going to be negotiating right after the first of the year. And so, it says, so everything is being looked at, certainly. Council 94, which is the collective bargaining unit that represents our custodians and maintenance staff, has just settled. And then our materials allowance, we have increased by 2%, offset by enrollment decline, insurance in health at 3%, dental and 4%, utilities by 3%, healthcare increased by the working rate, 3% estimate, an adjustment in rates for outside tuitions for special education, out-of-district placement, Charahoe, and charter schools. I've included those numbers for you. The capital plan was submitted, and I know that we have a capital plan meeting solely dedicated for that purpose in January. The next slide is our pro forma, and it shows that with a 0% property tax transfer to the schools, we are our very first piece of business in 2 weeks at our first school committee meeting of the year would be to find $1.9 million worth of reductions. With a 1%, it would be $1.4 million worth of reductions, and with a 2%, it would be $972,000 worth of reductions. There are 3 new programs that are included or will be included in our fiscal year 2016 budget because, even though we're getting less and less money every year for the state aid, our children deserve to keep competitive with the rest of the state, and they deserve an opportunity to, make certain that they get into the very best colleges and careers. So one of the pieces that we're looking at and have been looking at for a number of years, a partnership with the University of Rhode Island and the Utah Department of Ed, and we're not the only ones that are looking at this. So Charahoe has already put in a pull-out program in elementary schools for world language, and in speaking to folks in Charahoe at a recent conference, something would have to give at the elementary level, music, and art, library, in order for that to happen. And children are not able to become fluent before they reach high school. In this program, it's a 50-50 dual language immersion, meaning that if Raisa and I were each kindergarten teachers, and I taught in Spanish and she taught in English, that for us, 48 youngsters would experience, half of them would start their day with Raisa in English, and the other half would be with me in Spanish, and then they'd flip. And so youngsters would spend half their day immersed in Spanish. We've had bi-monthly conversations with a dual language committee made up of teachers, administrators, URI professors, and we have had a community conversation and monthly meet with PTO presidents, key stakeholders. We have identified the schools that we would put this program at. It would certainly be a lottery open to any South Kingstown entering kindergartner, and there would obviously be an option for parents to not put their child in this program, but have an English-only kindergarten. The other piece that won't be new to most of you, and there's a YouTube video that the manager really wanted me to have you watch today, but I refrained and said that if you wanted to click on it at your leisure, you could do so. Yep. Yep. Sure.
There is an expanding program that's required as you go forward.
Sure.
So there's a major financial commitment we're making with that brand new program.
So not necessarily, respectfully. What we've asked of folks that have opened these programs up nationwide has been, what does this cost? And for many folks, they'd say it doesn't cost anything. You would just need to be willing to lay off 2 of your kindergarten teachers and instead hire 2 kindergarten teachers who are Spanish speaking. That's not the message that we want to send to our community in the beginning of this work. I'm asking, and the Dual Language Immersion Committee is asking the school committee if they're interested in launching this, that we need to start off with hiring 2 additional kindergarten teachers, the Spanish-speaking kindergarten teachers, because we have no Spanish certified early childhood educators in our midst. Year 2, 3, 4, 5, our population of youngsters who live in South Kingstown, who we may be losing funding formula money for and supporting in a charter, or their parents are supporting them in a parochial school, they may come back to us those next couple of years. So, or we may have, due to retirement or attrition going forward, the opportunity to, instead of hiring an English-speaking brand new person we've never met yet, hire a Spanish-speaking brand new person we've never met yet. And so we've made a commitment, he's smiling at me, we've made a commitment to say that, that in the first year, perhaps the first or second year in 2 schools, that's what it would look like. But all of the other school departments that have gone forward with this work said that the children in town will choose to come here. And so you really won't be continually adding to your workforce, unless there are more children to add to your workforce.
So is there a plan for the future then? Is there a
Yes.
plan for first grade, second grade, and so
Yes.
on? So you'll
And-
continue to hire
Well,
Spanish-speaking instructors, teachers?
And so the Dual Language Immersion Committee has put forth a plan for what this will look like. Has that plan been talked about in depth at the school committee table? No. It all depends on what it will look like after year 1. We could find that this is not all that popular, and there's only 1 school that's needing and wanting this service. And therefore, I'm a Spanish-speaking teacher who also speaks English. We've seen this at the the independent, what's it called? International Charter School in Pawtucket, where Portuguese was not as popular as Spanish. And so what they did is they had 1 teacher who teaches in the morning in Portuguese and in the afternoon in English.
So this is going to be throughout all our elementary schools, just 1? 2.
Our plan is at 2 elementary schools, kindergarten only, the following year, first grade only, 2 elementary schools, with the opportunity for, yes, the following year, adding first grade, thank you, K-1 the following year. And every kindergarten student in the town would have an opportunity to apply for the lottery, similar to years ago when there was only 1 full-day kindergarten program. They could apply to the lottery. Now, could it expand? The committee would have to continually keep meeting and keeping the school committee informed of the progress, and if parents were taking advantage of this program.
And if it were successful, would you want students going to those 2 schools, or would you hope to increase it to the other elementary schools?
Yes. We don't know yet. It all depends on how successful. And, there's been talk, the parents who attended our community conversation were very, very excited about this opportunity and wanted this in their school. And so, and then the question came up, and would you expand on the languages? And there was a pretty thoughtful consideration as to why Spanish. I mean, the workforce is plentiful in our state. There are Spanish dual language immersion certified early childhood educators. All of the materials that we buy in English also are printed in Spanish. It's harder to get Mandarin, Polish, Vietnamese, I mean, more difficult. So we're open to looking at that, but it's a planning group that would continue to make recommendations to the school committee.
Kristen, when are you planning on starting this program? In
September.
September. And it says here, opportunities for federal, state, and grant funding. Have you received any?
Can't receive it
You can't
until we have
receive
a
it
program.
until you have a
But
program.
we've talked to.
You applied, how about that?
Say it again, please.
Applied for any?
Yes, we can't apply for them, many of them, until we have a program at least initially supported in terms of our own budget. Like, are we having a program? I was asked just this morning by parents who are, debating, am I going to put my child in public school or private school? When are you going to tell us? And so it's certainly consideration of this group is first. We got a lot of interesting dialogue with parents. We're looking to see, could we qualify for Title III money that's for ELL students? Can we qualify for support through the Rhode Island Department of Ed? Can we qualify for support through the Rhode Island Foundation or other community programs? And so that is one lens of work of the dual language committee, and we hope to qualify. We've certainly been told that we would have a better chance of qualifying if the program were in our 2 title schools. And that was one of the considerations for placing them at West Kingston and Peacedale for consideration.
And you've received a lot of parent support on this? Oh, good.
I would say, I don't want to jinx myself, but I'm prepared for just about every type of public forum, and I was completely overwhelmed by the amount of parents of young children who, said, why can't we do it in all schools? Why can't we do it K through 5? Why can't we do it in 4 different languages? And I quite frankly wasn't ready for that.
Well, I do suppose that's where you'd be headed if this takes off, Then you have to, more languages, more schools, more grade levels.
And I think that what it shows, what the programs in place are showing parents is that, by the end of 1st grade, beginning of 2nd grade, these students are largely fluent. They sound like native speakers.
Wow.
And right now, we give the AP exam in 12th grade. Nationally, in programs like this, they're giving the AP exam in 8th grade or 9th grade, and then in high school, students can now take a 3rd language, or URI has consented to either develop our teachers or bring their teachers here so that students may have the potential of graduating high school with a minor in Spanish. And so that's very attractive to parents in terms of their children being competitive in the global workforce, and in terms of getting into a really wonderful college program.
Has this been done in any other school district in the state?
15,000 school districts in the nation, no public school district in this state, although it is being considered at the budget table in Westerly, I think right now as well. And in Charahoe, as I said, they have a pull-out program, much like a itinerant, but not a 50-50 immersion. There's a couple of charter schools in Rhode Island. International Charter School has a program that would be more comparable to this, but they have some native Spanish-speaking children in their community, so it's a 50-50 two-way instead of a 50-50 one-way.
And is there good data available for how much, say, federal grants we could get from all those other districts that have been done? I'd love to see a good estimate of.
Yeah, I would too. There's a lot of data on student achievement, but grant funding varies by what your demographic looks like, what your plans are. We certainly have a good partner in the University of Rhode Island, and they would be helping us seek out support for this program. But we can't plan on that. Grant funding that's not even federal grant funding, I wouldn't invest in staff with holding my breath on that. But we're hoping that they would be able to supply materials, they would be able to provide professional development. The International Charter School has already offered to partner with our teachers, and they're also either investigating or fully vetted in an IB elementary program, so they're interested in partnering with us in much more than just the language.
I just had one more question. I'm looking at what you wrote here. 22 students may learn math and science in the morning with a Spanish-only teacher, and reading, writing, and social studies in the afternoon with an English-only teacher. So they would be learning math and science in Spanish?
Yes.
For the first time? I mean, we're
Yes.
talking kindergarten.
So Triangle,
Okay.
they don't
Different.
know. They don't know the language that surrounds math yet, largely.
Right.
So when they learn Triangle, when they learn the concept of addition, learning the concept in one language or learning, you can still solve it, the addition problem in another language. And so that took me quite a while to wrap my head around as well. One of the other models that they showcased, which my plan would leave it up to the two teachers and work really significantly with the two teachers, the English-speaking teacher and the Spanish-speaking teacher. Another model is she could teach the children half-day kindergarten, if you will, in English, so they get all subjects in English, and then I could teach the children in half-day kindergarten. That may be preferable to a teaching pair. That may not be preferable. I think it would I think it would be more comforting to our parents and teachers the first get around if they're learning how to read in English and then, you know, transferring that into Spanish. And so, you know, the professors have explained to us, and folks who have been doing this for 20 years have said children are acquiring language at this time. And they you know, showed us, I can't even tell you how many articles we've read about all the different pathways that are open to this work. And I've explained I have one pathway, right? I'm not a musician. I tried to be. I took French for a very long time, but we conjugated verbs back in the 80s. We didn't really speak French in high school in the 80s. And so I have one pathway. Some of these youngsters, if they're blessed enough to also be a musician, they'll have 3 pathways, neuro pathways. And the professor at the University of Rhode Island explained that they can solve all 3 simultaneously. It opens up their problem-solving capacity, and they are at less risk of Alzheimer's and dementia, which I thought was an added plus. Wish that I had known that, you know, long ago.
Interesting.
Yes, I just want to wrap my, excuse me, my hands around this.
I'm going to be
because I have
showing
a
that
son-
video. You know it, Steve.
I know, I
crystal
have a
for
son
you.
who has to take 4 years of a language at Salve, so he has to have 4 years of a language. He had 3 at South Kingstown and then on to a 4th. But in the younger grades, if you're doing this at an earlier age, I might be missing something by the fact that, you know, by the 1st grade, they're typically fluent. But what happens if there's a gap and they're not taking a language again until middle school to high school?
Well, so our plan is for them to consecutively take a language. Because if there's a gap, they'll lose it.
That was my biggest concern.
Yep.
So if you're giving them the opportunity to do this at a young age, and then they don't have it for X number of years, and
Right, so
then,
it's going to go, as the manager tried to explain in the beginning, the investment in kindergarten would need to be an investment in 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. And then we're also working our way down we've started with the investment in 8th grade this year. Next year, parents and teachers are looking at 7th grade, and then a potential for a cultural exploration in 6th grade eventually would become, for these kids, language. One of their content strands, you know, they have 4 middle school teachers. One of their middle school teachers on that particular team would need to be proficient in Spanish.
okay, I appreciate that, because I know in high school they'll...
It's hard to explain on only one slide. It's pretty deep. But if you click on the YouTube video from Utah, they do quite a bit in that, in explaining it.
I'm just curious, because you had said that you would have to fire some kindergarten teachers and hire some that Spanish speaking
Nope. What,
place.
what-
I'm just curious,
No.
going forward, what would you
Yep.
do? 1st grade, 2nd grade, we would have to hire Spanish speaking teachers?
So in order for this program to be supported, we would need to make sure that there were 1 or 2, depending upon the cohort that we attract, Spanish-speaking, dual-certified early
We don't
childhood
have
teachers.
that right now.
We don't have any right now.
We have none.
Right, but
So
we
to
have-
make this go forward, we are looking at doing this for kindergarten, then 1st
Then
and 2nd.
first and second.
That's hiring a lot going
Right.
forward.
And so the first year, we would make an intentional investment of 2 extra teachers. Going forward, if we knew...
So they would
we
be
had-
extra on...
Extra.
Thank you.
Don't have them right now. The overall class size for kindergarten could shrink for all kindergarten teachers. But I want to be clear that, you know, we determine kindergarten staffing based on the number of kindergartners that are projected to come in first.
Right.
That projection is lower this year than it was last year. And so it may not be 2 more kindergarten teachers than what we have currently, but it could be, depending upon how many kids we attract.
Right.
And then in first grade, the worst-case scenario, I think that the manager highlighted, which is we could be committed to hiring, if no one in that grade level or in the elementary area retires or decides to teach at the middle level, we could be adding 2 teachers per year to support this program.
And losing 2?
No, and losing
Or shuffling them around?
Add would be losing nothing.
Yep, so you just,
Um,
they'd
just
go to a
add.
different grade?
Nope, just add. Like next year, add 2 more first grade. Following year, add 2 more second grade. Next year, 2 more third grade.
Okay,
And so then once they reach middle school, then it's not a 50-50 split anymore. They have enough language on board that they
Right.
only need to make sure that they're still keeping up the language and learning through one of the content strands. And so, but what the other folks in the nation have told us is that people, right now, I think the child outreach data that was provided to me about a month ago said that we had approximately 296 kindergarten students eligible to attend South Kingstown schools this year, who would be in kindergarten now, and we have approximately 202 in the seats. So a little less than a third are born here and could go to school here, but are not. So if we were to attract those youngsters, then we would be, keeping our own teachers
Right.
and getting more money in the funding formula. We also, in a typical year, have a teacher or 2 at the elementary
Retire.
level that would retire, and if we were forward-thinking and planning in this regard, we may be able to hire a Spanish-speaking teacher
Right.
to replace a retiree. I know it's a big concept. We've been talking about it for a while, but it's new to you, so
Well, I know a lot of people are very excited about it, and it is. I'm just wanted to wrap my head around where it was going in the future, because I do think it will be a successful program, and so I'm already thinking ahead with you.
So the next new program is the one-to-one technology at South Kingstown High School. And so we started this actually last year. Just to give you a statewide perspective, there are 14 districts in the state of Rhode Island right now who have one-to-one technology. And there are about 4 districts that have bring your own device. And so, and other folks are either choosing to, stay without technology or moving to this year or the next year, moving into either BYOD or one-to-one. Last year, instead of going 9 through 12, which was a consideration of our technology team, we invested in a teacher technology coach who worked with 4 pilot teachers at the high school who applied to get 25 laptops for their classroom. In addition to that, worked with, and is working with now, I don't know why I'm saying it in the past tense, 9 department chair and the 4 administrators at the high school to develop a critical mass of folks that are working within a blended learning environment, which is face-to-face teaching with using the device to access content, and what we call the digital curation of curriculum. So sort of piecing together digital content to lessen your reliance on textbooks. And that's been very successful. The idea is that these folks then would move to be the 9th and 10th grade teachers next year, and 9th and 10th grade students would get their own device. I think the biggest area of misunderstanding is how do you pilot a one-to-one device if the kid doesn't get to take home the device? What we've learned from, again, all over the nation is the big idea is not, is the device going to be safe with the student? The big idea is what does it look like in the classroom? What does the management look like? How are the teachers able to make certain that they're able to instruct without distraction with kids, surfing on the internet and doing their word processing? for maybe another class, or, how are they going to use this device in order to access the curriculum? And so that's really where the heavy lift was, and that's really the exciting work that's going on in our schools this year. And so with a dedicated few, they have really done some remarkable things. Principal McCarthy reported out at our last school committee meeting a lot of the successes and the interest that's going on at the high school. We are just repurposing money within our technology and supplies budgets. If you can imagine, once you're using the device, you're not printing. You're emailing through Google Docs back and forth with each other. Students are, so we're not relying on copy paper or copy machines as much as we were in the past. Our textbook orders have changed. We're not completely eliminating textbooks, but some of the textbooks would be electronic textbooks, and some of the textbooks would not be, as needed. They can pull together a lot of different resources for youngsters at their reading levels, higher or lower. And so we're looking to put devices in for 9th and 10th grade youngsters next year and their teachers. We repurposed the devices we already provided to the high school last year, and then every year thereafter putting the devices in the hands of 9th grade youngsters. We will be in the future disassembling some of the labs that we've had, because we will be moving from students won't need to go to the lab if they have their own device. And we're seeing that right now at Curtis Corner Middle School. We had a heavy investment in laptops at Curtis Corner for classroom use, not take-home use last year.
So it begs the obvious question, how do they do their homework if they don't take the machine home?
They take the machine home.
Oh, they do? I thought you said they
This year,
didn't.
they're not taking their machine home. They're doing their homework in the traditional way. Or they can, email their homework in from their own device at home. But the investment really was seeing how the instruction and the management changed during the day. Next year, the idea is for 9th and 10th grade youngsters that they will likely be emailing their homework back and forth. And we're moving to a Google platform. And so and again, that's new for us, but we're taking our lead from the teachers that are working in this one-to-one device pilot right now.
So there will be no more paper homework, like the dog ate my homework.
Well,
It'll
for
be
11th and 12th graders, there will be. But we're already starting to see a shift towards this.
Well, this is what the colleges do now. Everybody does everything via email. You never see paper.
That's correct.
So
That's what we would be seeing eventually. I mean, my child's school went to 9 through 12 last year, and Jake is I've been pretty happy with the fact that he has not missed an assignment yet, because he goes on and instead of, I forgot to write that down, I'm not really sure what was said over the loudspeaker, I was hurrying from this class to the other class, it's all available for them.
And they can do it online. Like if it's a question and answer, they can fill in the blanks or
Everything
whatever it
would go
is.
online. Dance tickets, permission slips, scheduling parent conferences, today at the key stakeholders meeting with parents, PTO presidents, they said, well, will we get training too? And that's the idea. Yeah, you'll get training too. And how will you register for that? My husband had to make his own Google account in order to, because that was like step 1, toe in the water, make a Google account. Step 2, register for the Google training. And then show up and learn how to do the Google forms. And so it's exciting.
Yeah.
And it is what I've, 2 in college, and it is, colleges are on that sort of platform. So the last piece that was alluded to is a partnership with the South Kingstown Police Department with a Curtis Corner-based school resource officer. It's a proactive approach, comes from our training in crisis prevention. We have a district crisis team and crisis teams at every school. This would be an additional school resource officer who would be trained, of course, and the mission of school resource officers is to educate, counsel, and protect the school community. promoting a positive image of law enforcement to our students, and to provide the safest learning environment in our schools. I've also attached the school resource officer website for your information. Given the recent concerns in Rhode Island and Connecticut and nationally, we certainly have heard from our parents. Some have come to school committee meetings, some have sent emails, some have showed up on our doorsteps asking for more of a police presence in our schools. Certainly not every voice, I'm sure, feels that way, but a critical mass have come forward. Although the officer would be based at Curtis Corner, there has been a need pre-K through 8 to have someone trained with a juvenile lens in our schools. I can give you an example of one school I was called to several months ago where mom got off the plane from Florida, came to collect her child. The schools had never met her before. And so, you know, I started driving, and I started calling Captain Ewing Chow and said, okay, someone needs to meet me there because this is, you know, new territory. We, you know, some of our principals have had a lot of custody arrangements that have been new territory, and we need that support of our police partners. It's not our area of expertise, but protecting our young children certainly is. And, you know, anti-bullying efforts in the schools, teachers and parents and principals at our elementary schools have said, you know, who will partner with us in this? And we certainly have had a wonderful partnership with the police department by having someone who knows our schools intimately and who works well with our principals and teachers, who the parents can count on to come out and give a third grade group of kiddos a talk on you know, really not engaging in bullying type behavior, would be something that the principals would welcome. And it's with the generosity of the chief and the police department, a 50-50 cost share of salary, benefits, and training with the police department.
I just have a quick question. I know that Curtis Corner you just hired someone for a Dean of Students position there. So with this added position, it seems like I'm just wondering if there's any evaluation process going forward. Do you evaluate the success or failure of these new positions? Because with the Dean of Students position, you know, from the outside, I was looking at it like it seems a little administrative heavy over there. Principal, vice principal, I think you still have a student assistant counselor, and then the Dean of Students. So when I heard about the police officer, it just seemed, not that I'm opposed to him being there, because I do think the safety is important, and I understand he'd be going around to a lot of the schools, but I'm just wondering, having just hired that Dean of Students, if there's a setback to say, how's that going? How is that working? Because it seemed like one just jumped right on top and happened very quickly.
Sure. So the student assistance counselor is not a school department employee. It's a vendor agreement, and at the Curtis Corner Middle School, it's a part-time position. They do different things. So the student assistance counselor, it's a very confidential process. They're not a member of their student support, but not someone who would report back information at all to the teachers or to the administrators, unless it was in a crisis capacity, certainly. In terms of the Dean of Students, it's a teaching position, so that's not an administrator. Dave Pope is a teacher. He's a member of the bargaining unit, and a Dean of Students position is something that's used throughout New England as a different type of a lens for consequences, for restorative justice practices, for PBIS. And actually, it's something that when I've conducted budget hearings for the first times with the teachers in the schools this year. More often than not, they view it as a positive step forward and are asking me, so will we be adding a Dean of Students to the high school, to Broad Rock? What will that look like?
Does that Dean of Students have a classroom then? If that's a class, but they're a teacher.
Correct, it's a teacher. So it's a bargaining unit position, and they could have any certification, but a background that would probably be in restorative justice practices, could be in mental health support, could be in an array of different supportive measures. But throughout the state, Dean of Students
And so what does the vice principal currently do now?
So the vice principal is an administrator, and so I would say years ago, so when I was in middle school and high school, the vice principal, and I certainly don't want to mean any disrespect to my former vice principals, but largely their position was discipline, right? They weren't seen to be educational
Right.
leaders. They weren't seen to be moving IEP meetings or RTI meetings. They weren't going in and doing the very significant evaluation systems that we have in place now. They weren't moving the work in the classroom. So what ends up happening in the day of an assistant principal now is they're not sort of waiting in their office for customers. So if you can imagine having been a teacher before, you're not quite sure if something will happen at 9:01 or 9:05 or 9:20 or not at all this hour. We're hopeful that kids can stay in their classroom and be very engaged in active learning. But when something does occur and a teacher needs support or a student needs support, the assistant principal would be pulled out of an RTI team meeting with a parent, a 504 plan meeting with a parent. And at a majority of our schools, IEP meetings could go one full day. I, as principal, would be going to those, while the vice principal would be going to the RTI sessions or the 504 meetings. There are parent meetings that come up during the day, training sessions that come up during the day, and evaluation, leading, work, et cetera. So it's no longer in any school the role of vice principal being that disciplinarian anymore. I don't like to think of the dean of students as a disciplinarian, but they're certainly there to support students. And they also, at times when they're not supporting students, they're not leading any of that other work. They're not talking with parents on the phone about a call you might have made to the school, something that's going on that's non-student to student in the classrooms. So Mr. Pope will have a list of students that he knows are at risk and will check in with and do that extra. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if that dean of students then would travel to the other schools like some of the other positions have in the past, or if he would just only be at that one school.
I'm not seeing a dean of students anywhere travel, because what happens is, but it's interesting, I have to give that more thought. Typically, a dean of students is there as that support, so that if a teacher reports something has gone on in the classroom, they're immediate, they're there. They're not, off running another parent or teacher meeting, and so they can immediately conduct an investigation, pull the children aside, talk to the students, talk to the mom or dad, talk to the teacher, follow up on that immediately so that no time is lost. And that's the model that we've seen in Cumberland High School, Charahoe, Westerly, East Providence, in many of the middle schools in our state. And I don't know if it would work, quite frankly, if they were leaving, because then what would happen if something occurred while they were gone? But I haven't really thought hard about that.
I just brought it up because you mentioned the police officer would be going to all the elementary schools as well, so it's
Right,
kind
because
of...
the police officer wouldn't be a direct service provider. So the police officer would be able to be deployed to the other schools. And so it's hard for me to sort of explain the difference between the two, but they're very different. Right now, Officer Gillen at the high school, he's not an administrator, he's not one of our teachers, he's not giving consequences for behavior. His liaison duties are quite different than any of our staff members. He's an additional layer of support, but he stays at the high school. And so we actually talked to the key stakeholders this morning, and I relayed a story that whenever a new principal has come here from another district, we've received them quite recently from Providence and Woonsocket, from Cranston, and when they're ready to conduct a crisis drill, they say, okay, where's the school resource officer? And I said, no, Mr. Gillen is primarily located at the high school. And they said, well, typically, when I'm going to do an evacuation, I have the lens of an officer. They have a different lens that they look
Absolutely.
at in terms of safety. They would be a part of our crisis team, and they would come out and take a look at the drop-off procedures, at the pickup procedures. So they're a liaison, but not a direct service provider in that particular school.
Okay.
And we may find that Curtis Corner is not the permanent, day-to-day base. That came up today. They said, well, what if you find that Broad Rock may want, the person for 2 days a week? And that, I think it's something to explore.
Let me also comment on that. The police officer is not an employee of the school department, not controlled through the police department or directed through the police department. It's an employee that's a certified police officer. So that police officer would work in conjunction with the school administration and particularly the administration at the schools, but it would be coordinated and subject to review and approval through the police department and through the chief. The principal responsibilities there is for prevention of crime and for safety enhancement within. If there was a need to look at what's going on in the elementary schools, they would be involved. Our police department now is involved when there's evacuations at schools. There's
Get a
police
lot
that
of
are
support from-
brought
yes.
in that are on duty for the day for regular patrols that would be there to be able to ensure that the safety of the students.
Oh,
So-
absolutely. I didn't
So
mean to intimate
I'm just
that there wasn't-
suggesting that
it's just a
the
different
police
level of
department
training.
the police department coordinates with the schools on a great deal of activities.
Absolutely.
But they're not part of administration. They're not there for discipline. They're there for dealing with juvenile issues. There's a good deal of juvenile issues now that have to be dealt with through the police department, which are in the schools anyway. What we're looking at is, what's most important for us at this point is to have a police presence when school's opening and when school's closing, to see what's going on and to ensure that people are in a safe condition. And to report with observation whether there's unsafe conditions or changes that need to be made. That's what the role of that officer will be, particularly at a middle school level. Whether they are in the elementary schools is dependent on what the school system needs, and also on what the officer sees in conjunction with staff at the police department as to where that deployment needs to be. But it isn't a school function as much as it is a public safety function, and to provide for better security within the school environment.
Quick question, I'll make this brief because I don't want everybody to be here all night. I'm a dollars and cents person, to be honest with you, so answer this as easily as you see fit. But I'm seeing the cost of the SRO will be $42,112, a 50/50 cost share salary, benefits, and training with the SKPD. I don't care whose budget it comes out of, but my bottom line is, okay, is the $42,112 your responsibility? So is this salary truthfully $84,226?
That's salary, benefits, and training
Okay.
is the 80,000 figure. So
That
it's
seems
truly-
excessive to me, I have to be perfectly honest with you, but I don't know, because I haven't researched any of the numbers on this. So,
Yeah, we're planning on a family benefits package, and so, of course, that's the one page I didn't bring with me. Do you have-
nope, you don't have to. I don't want you to go into a complete dissertation. We really haven't looked at it long enough, and I know it's getting late, but I didn't know if the 42,000 was being cut in half, and
Nope,
half of that, or it was actually 84,224.
that's
and-
correct, 84,224.
I just want to say, I do see the benefits of having a police officer there. I just simply was questioning because of the new position. I do see the value in our children making personal relationships with police officers, having them there, having someone to talk to. I think it would be a benefit to the schools. I just was curious about when you do implement these new positions, if there is an evaluation process that takes place, 6 months down the road or a year down the road, do you look back at it with some formula and decide what works and what doesn't?
I mean, right now, yes. There's not really a formula, quite frankly. It's program evaluation or a staff evaluation. And this is a brand-new program for us. Our qualitative information that's being received by the parents and the teachers in the school to the teachers union, to myself, to the principals, is that Dave Pope's work is really good work, and it's bringing much more of a restorative justice, and which is a whole nother piece in and of itself, but we're seeing very good results so far. And the fact that this is a teaching position is inspired a lot of confidence with the other faculty members. This is their colleague, and this is a colleague that was in the classroom just last year, and so knows certainly the children very well, and knows his colleagues very well.
Right, and I think part of the success of that particular position will be based on Dave Pope, because he already has that relationship with the kids, and people do love him. So I don't know if you'd be able to replicate that in other schools, even if you wanted to, but thank you.
Kristen, why don't you have a dean of students at the high school? How did you make that choice? I mean, obviously, there's, the age group at the middle school is at risk, and probably a very good idea to put him there, but, I mean, the vice principals are still acting as disciplinarians at the high school?
Yes. And so is that an area for future focus? Yes. That's something that we're looking at for, is it a program that would fit at the high school or at Broad Rock? Something that's come up at our teacher meetings about the budget. What does that look like? Is there plans for expansion? When we first learned about it at the Great Schools Conference, and we've been hearing from our colleagues in the rest of the state, there are dean of students positions at the high school, and that would probably entail a reconfiguration of work and services. And so we wanted to make sure that our first pilot went well before we started exploring what might it look like in the out years at other buildings. So
Is that the end of the presentation?
yes, this is my ta-da slide. The whole, it's certainly a process, and we look forward to continued conversations with you and certainly with the public, and that's what we have for you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to the members of the public for their patience. My one comment is that I think all of these 3 new proposed programs would be a great benefit to the students, but I'm concerned that the gap in achievement we see between the special education students and the impoverished students is not being addressed by any of these new programs. And given the fact that we're looking at declining revenues potentially, or probably, where are we going to make the investments in those students? Because they seem to be the biggest problem in the school system right now. So I just would make that comment. Any other comments from the council members? Then it is time for public comment. And please come to the podium, state your name, and speak into the microphone. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to say thank you all for your service to the town. You're all amazing at your jobs and your positions. My name's Alicia Collins, and I am the parent of a Curtis Corner Middle School student. And I'd just like to share some concerns with you. Yesterday marks the 2nd anniversary of the school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut that took the lives of 26 young children and educators. The cost to the town of Newtown is hard to quantify. The monetary cost is past $4 million as the town scrambles to provide counseling and other mental health-related services to the hundreds, perhaps thousands of people who were directly affected by this massacre. 2 years later, the community is still plagued by post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. The town of Newtown, Connecticut may never be the same. Since the shooting in Newtown, there have been 84 additional school shootings in the U.S. Educators and parents are joining together across the nation to address this tragic issue. Many people have joined together to change gun laws, which has been met with much opposition from the NRA and fellow gun owners. The NRA has encouraged schools to hire police officers to combat school violence. Civil rights groups have been gathering data on police officers in schools, and in fact, a police presence in schools is not creating a safer environment or halting school violence. Consistent among the data collected from schools across the U.S. is that the presence of police officers in schools has resulted in an abundance of civil rights violations of students with disabilities and students of color. Having police officers in schools is adding to the current school-to-prison pipeline for disadvantaged students. These are unintended consequences that cannot be ignored. But what is perhaps most disturbing is that the increased police presence won't just cause harm to some students. There's no evidence that it will keep any students safer. A recent report by the civil rights organization, the Advancement Project, notes that most school-based attacks are not halted by resource officers even when they are present, but instead end with the intervention of school administrators, educators, and students. The Advancement Project report further documents that safe schools don't result from merely posting a police officer in the halls. Instead, a truly safe school must create support networks, foster peer relationship building, provide access to counseling services, and facilitate parental involvement. These are the kind of schools that create positive, affirming environments and use restorative justice and conflict resolution to solve disputes that will inevitably occur. Many educators and parents view the issue of school violence from another angle, which chooses to examine the root cause. Detailed in the 114-page report recently compiled as part of the Newtown investigation is a series of missed opportunities by the Newtown School District, missed opportunities to adequately identify the disabilities, mental health problems of the perpetrator. The school district did not provide adequate supports for this disabled young man and carries some of the weight of this horrific tragedy. It is a very concerning statistic that Rhode Island ranks highest for people living with mental health problems in this country. Recently, there was an article in the Providence Journal that delineated the inadequacy of our state mental health support network. School is often the only place, and I mean the only place, a child is identified as needing mental health supports, and as school violence escalates, it's clear that the mental health needs of our youth are not being met. Each year, federal and state funding to schools declines. I understand that this presents incredible challenges to towns like ours and school districts as they balance their budgets. That said, in developing the budget going forward, I beg you to please take the time to reflect on the current staffing and the support staff in the district. 10 years ago, the district had 19 full-time therapists. Currently, the district has 14. Even though enrollment numbers are down, therapists and mental health professionals are needed more than ever to help navigate the very trying time that is adolescence. At Curtis Corner Middle School, which I'm familiar with, in particular, there is a full-time social worker present 3 days per week. The National Association of Social Workers, along with other mental health experts in Rhode Island, agree that there must be one full-time social worker per 400 students to even begin to meet student need. Curtis Corner Middle School houses over 500 students and has 3/5 of a social worker present. Since my son started at CCMS last fall, there has consistently been no mental health staff present on Wednesdays. Each Wednesday, one guidance counselor is expected to meet the needs of over 500 kids. Are we missing opportunities to intervene and mitigate student conflict? Are there days when students would like to reach out to an adult for counseling, but there's nobody there to help them through a crisis? We may never know. School violence shows that most adolescents are not capable of advocating for their own mental health care. We need more adults in schools reaching out to students in need. Over the past 3 years, 20 full-time teacher assistant positions have been cut, and nearly 20 full-time teaching positions. These staff cuts increase the workload and responsibilities of existing educators and school staff, which cuts back on the attention and care every student receives. Spreading our staff thin could separate students from graduating. It could separate an A, B student from reaching their potential as an honor student. The more dangerous outcomes of position cuts are that teachers and support staff don't have time to adequately respond to the emotional and educational needs of students, creating an unsafe environment for all learners. I believe that the best way to increase enrollment in our district is not to create new programs, like the dual language immersion program, for example, and maybe even the laptop initiative. I don't know if that's really, if those things are more important than school safety. I believe the best way for us to increase enrollment numbers in the district is to really bolster the support staff and programs that already exist. Our district has some of the best educators in the state, probably the nation, and I think that we should treat them that way and really give them the support they need to provide our kids with an exceptional education, the one that South Kingstown is known for. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Good evening, Jim O'Neill. Steve, another great report. I found no errors in there. And Kristen, terrific job with your team. Great job. And thank you to the last speaker, because I certainly cannot speak to the mental health situation in schools or just in society. I certainly feel I know the problem with gun violence. There are just too many of these weapons out in the public, and not enough responsible folks taking care of those people who do own them. And I can tell you a lot of firsthand stories, because my next-door neighbor just retired from Newtown after 33 years of teaching there. And if you want to hear stories, she's invited now throughout the country to speak on the issues you brought up, as well as the capacity of weapons, as well as not being able to follow the trail of weapons sales, which is an incredible disaster for a nation like us, and especially now in the world of internet science. You think this would be a foregone conclusion that we could take care of it. Just wanted to mention a few things tonight. No one really talked about Governor-elect Raimondo, what she's looking at the next 4 years, which have been repeated by every expenditure council up in the city of Providence and working for the state. She's looking at a $175 million deficit next year, out to $465 million forecast in 4 years. You know, somehow or another, this is going to back up into our citizens and obviously our programs for schools and our municipal services that we offer. Incredible challenge for her ahead of us. And then you heard tonight what the General Assembly may do with the motor vehicle tax situation. That could be another ton of money out of our pocket. I just don't know how much more we could ask from our citizens to pay. Unfortunately, with these deficits, it means that the educational funding formula, which we'd all like to retract the $350,000 we're going to lose this year, it's just not going to be possible. They're just not going to be able to find the money to do that. What really hurts us, because our success is obvious at the state level, we're losing, as an example, this year, $350,000, Steve mentioned, was a possibility. And out of the $30 million increase in the state budget of almost $900 million that was passed last year, we got zero of the $30 million. Having about 2.8, 2.9% of the population, we should have gotten 850,000 there. 850,000. We lose 350,000. We're now at 1,150,000. We cannot expect our taxpayers to keep taking that bill and having to pay that. And the schools have done a great job with this over the years. As I just complimented Kristen, a great job. But our taxpayers cannot keep doing this. What happens if there's a negotiated settlement in the pension case? You're now talking about $700 to $800 million that has been saved with that act from state and town taxpayers and municipalities. I don't know of any community that has escrowed or put into a reserve account any combination of monies to pay for a negotiated settlement. Maybe that would take place over the years, I don't know. But that's another, I just hope it doesn't happen. I don't know where we'd find the funding for it. Just a couple more things, and I'll leave. Dr. Mega last year at our operating budget hearings back in February, March, and echoed something that I've been talking about for the last 5 years. And to quote him, I think I'm quoting him correctly, we're over-facilitated. And my thoughts were that we do have too many schools, too many classrooms. Unfortunately, we have an awkward arrangement of our classrooms given what the populations have dropped to. Frankly, I think there are a number of savings there that a lot of that money could be placed into, well, new programs or existing programs and existing quality teachers and therapists, maybe are the ones that should be receiving that money. But I just want to read something from 2009, which from the newspapers. Dr. Hicks at the time was in your spot, Kristen. And what I just want to tell you here, they were talking about closing Curtis Corner Middle School, the older of the two middle schools. And he's quoted, "It's a move that still may happen at the end of that academic year." This is 2009. "What is more likely," said Hicks, "is that the department will put off the decision until next year. The need to consolidate would probably still exist as the economy is not expected to immediately turn around. Postponing the closure would give the town more time to formulate a plan for moving the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders into that school. And then finally, the move would allow the district to save money by cutting one administrative position and some support positions," Hicks said. South Road is also much smaller than Curtis Corner, so that closing would lead to savings in heating, cooling, so on and so forth. And it's interesting, from 5 years ago, your slide showed the exact same number that NESDEC, the New England School Development Council, predicted, down 270 kids. So here we are faced with a nightmare at the state level, and there are possibilities here that I believe a conversation is really in order here. Are our schools in the best positions, and are we using our facilities to what the taxpayers, the economies of scale that they would expect? But frankly, I'm also on the team that I think we should consider in the capital budget spending maybe $2 or $3 million to add maybe 6 classrooms to Broad Rock. Should Broad Rock just have 6th, 7th, 8th grades? And maybe some of that money to help with the Wakefield Elementary, which is probably in need of most of the capital improvements, but the importance of Wakefield Elementary to downtown Wakefield, the energy, vitality, parents and kids, it's really part of the community and really a conversation that the town council would need to have with the school committee as well as the citizens, because that's one school I'd hate to see closed. So finally, I think you're going to have to address the Curtis Corner high school situation. Many parents have said, let's make Curtis Corner the high school, vice versa. Every combinations, that's a decision you'll have to make. And I don't think, though, it's really fair to ask the taxpayers for an increase in any of our budgets when the facility situation is such that we really have a surplus. And then finally, just unfortunately, from my standpoint as a Democrat, but I'm really quite worried about the new Congress coming in. I don't think we can expect any help whatsoever financially, any improvement. I'm just hoping it's status quo, but I'm worried we're going to see everything from Medicaid right down the line reduced. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments from the public? Hearing none, number 3 on the agenda is other matters of interest and concern. I'm not sure. Mr. Daley LaBelle.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple points. You know, and this may speak a little bit to Mr. O'Neill's concern, you know, do we have a reserve fund if there's a settlement over the pensions? But we do have close to a $3 million I don't know if it's termed as a surplus, but at the school department. So you know, that may be a cushion there. But I'm thinking in terms of, rather than cutting more positions, you know, whether or not we want to consider, since the town is healthy, and I'm sure I'm going to get some pushback on this, but since the town has healthy undesignated fund, you know, can the school be a little more aggressive with tapping its funds? And if I don't have, the slide wasn't here, and I thought I brought it with me, but I didn't. But I think that the surplus each year, the last couple of years, has been 600,000. So I just want to bring that forward. I just want to clarify, too, that, the sheet that I have, that the cuts have not been across the board, so I just want to point out a difference there. That the administrators from 2008 and 2009 to 2013, 2014 have gone up 3 positions. I'm not sure about this current year if we still have another one. So, the number of administrators has gone up, just for a piece of information. And just that the NECAP data, at RIDE, which looks at our entire district, for 5 years is flat. And so it is in the, that's a trend. That it's right in the presentation, the superintendent's presentation. So it's actually slightly down over 5 years, but it's by 1 point on both the reading and the math, so I would basically just say it's flat. Other area districts around us have gone past us, and so I'm not sure if the cuts themselves are having an impact, or there's been a lot of disruptions in this district over 5 years, including a lot of cuts. So I'm just very, I'd like to see as much as possible, and we do have to be sensitive to the taxpayer. Absolutely, I agree with Mr. O'Neill on that. But I just don't want to see the cuts continue to happen, and since it is a trend, it's not a bubble. I think it does start to mean something, that what has happened has impacted our program.
Great, is that it? No more comments?
I'm just curious if there are any plans to add any social workers to any of the schools, since that obviously seems to be an issue where we have not enough coverage.
So, and I've spoken to Mrs. Collins quite recently about this. The state of Rhode Island actually did away with caps for service providers several years ago, and created a pupil personnel staffing plan that's in the hands of the special ed director, who consults quite regularly with her staff. And we have not cut in the last 2 years social workers, psychologists, therapists, despite the fact I think Mr. Daley LaBelle referred to, our enrollment's decreasing, our funding is decreasing, and those have been areas that we have, quite frankly, held harmless due to a lot of what was spoken about this evening. We have, tonight's the pro forma, right? So clearly, you've heard from one parent that there is a need in this area, and I think that it's something for the school committee and the director to consider going forward.
I was very surprised when she said on Wednesdays there's no one there. I think if a child needs someone to talk to on a Wednesday, they should have someone there. That's a problem. I don't even understand that. I sat here and just assumed, and that's my own fault, that position was there.
What
A
position?
social worker at each of the schools full-time.
There is not a full-time social worker in each of our schools. There's not a full-time psychologist in each of our schools. Every day, all day.
Yeah, that's something that I would like to certainly look at, how often they are there, because, when we were talking about other positions, you said when there's a need, they should be there, and I see this very, very important.
I agree,
So,
very important.
yeah, I would certainly like to see what we have and try to fill in those gaps for the students. It's important.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask a quick question, Kristen. When you talked about the Rhode Island per pupil expenditure, and you said that in your graph here, it says that East Greenwich and Barrington, they spend a bit less than us per pupil. What are we, we're at, well, the state says we're at 18,035, and each of those are 14 and change. You said we're at 17 and change. Anyway, you said, what do they invest in to get more bang for their buck? Did you find anything out on that? Or is that just a question out in space?
So there's a lot of different
Is it
pieces that go into
socioeconomic?
this.
Is that what it
Well,
is?
certainly demographics are always a piece of something to consider. There is no exact right formula for every single school and every single school department. They're smaller than we are. They have less poverty. They have less transient rate. They have, sure.
It's, okay, in the example of Barrington, it's hard to compare. We're not comparing apples to apples. So Barrington, I can only say, we have a $3.5 million transportation budget. They have a $500,000 transportation budget. It's things like that.
Sure.
So I don't know that.
No, she made the comment, and I was just picking up on it, that, you know, you've looked into that. What do they invest in that's different from what we're doing?
There are
Because they're-
expenses that we have, I think,
They're
that they
also
don't
ranked higher than us, and they're spending less money per pupil. So it certainly is worth a look at what are they doing. And I agree with you, Razor. I mean, they don't have the
We have
transportation
fixed costs, right, that they don't have. So that's one element of it.
And of course, once again, we should urge the legislatures to add that to the funding formula. I think we should just, you know, put that resolution back out again for, you know, the school committee and the town council, and drive it home again. I mean, it certainly is something that we should be considered, should be considered by the legislators, that we have, you know, great transportation costs that are not included in the funding formula.
Agree.
So I just, you know, just wanted to follow up on what you said on the Barrington East Greenwich, if maybe we could learn something.
And we continue to visit other school departments to try to see what we can learn. We've taken teachers with us, on occasion administration with us, to try to see really great programs. You know, in Barrington, sometimes it's investment in reading, in coaches, instructional coaches. That has been an investment that South Kingstown has made in instructional coaches, in professional development. But demographics is a big part of their work. And it's hard. You know, we have different collective bargaining agreements. We have different demographics. We have different fixed costs. We have different building size, different building levels of repair. And so it's tricky to try to compare. But we try to bring back lessons learned from all the different communities. But yeah, Barrington definitely confounds me in terms of the small amount of money that they tend to put forward. And you know, they have in some years gone above the 4% tax cap and had financial town meetings to say this is something that we want to invest in. And some years they've not been able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, just bringing up the transportation, I guess I'm just wondering if maybe the school committee needs to, but maybe town council's interested. I'd like it to have a kind of a more broad look, because there has been different configurations to our schools and where the grades are and this kind of thing, or that's changed over the last 5 years. And the transportation, I was looking at this as a line item 5 years ago was $3.2 million. This year it's $3.8 million. So that's $600,000. So I don't know if that's where the kids are and how everything is set up. So that may just be something we want to look at.
Keith?
I wanted to weigh in on a couple issues that were brought up, and I think they're all tied together. Rachel, you had mentioned, is there accountability for positions that come on? I'd like to echo that sentiment, and I think we could use more accountability for positions that are brought on. I was on the transportation subcommittee looking into technologies that we can use to enhance our buses and find budget savings, perhaps. I think we have acquired bus monitors through unfunded mandates. I don't know, I don't want to steer the conversation off in a wrong direction, but we were given bus monitors. The state was going to pay for them. The next year, you have to keep the bus monitors, but we're not paying for them anymore. So I'm all for the children's safety, and if it was the will of the community to say we want to spend our tax dollars for bus monitors, then so be it. In my perception, as I've watched the narrative move forward, the town was never, no town in the state has ever been provided the option of going, do you want bus monitors? Do you want your money spent that way? It was an unfunded mandate. And as far as accountability, I understand how we came across bus monitors. There was a child's death involved, and it was a tragic accident. We have safety equipment on the bus that given accident, the physics of what took place that ended up having the bus run over the child. We have safety equipment on the bus that would prevent such a thing. The bus monitors were an addition to that, and again, if it was the will of our community to spend our money that way, so be it. I would turn the question around as far as safety goes. Do we have any numbers that bus monitors have improved the safety of our students? It's kind of proving a negative. Well, no student's been hurt since then, so they must be providing safety. But it doesn't work quite that way. You can't really prove that. And again, not that I'm for or against bus monitors, I'm against having them mandated and then never giving the taxpayers the opportunity to say, we'd like our money spent that way. And as far as the, I'd like to comment on the comment that Ms. Collins made as far as the mental health of our students. I think that is an issue that needs to be talked about. I think it's a valuable way to spend our money. I'm having never had the need for that. I have no pundency on that, so I definitely have sympathy for someone who is in need of that. Where I might push back on that is I don't see it as an issue of a student needing mental health and not getting it or getting it. I think it's really more of an issue of what budget is it going to go into. And I would be curious to find out, if a family has health insurance, can that health insurance policy spend some money on acquiring these services that the student needs? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not saying yay or nay. What I'm saying is I'm concerned that historically I feel as though the public school system keeps getting stuff lumped on it. It becomes the school system's responsibility. And obviously in budgetary times like we have, I'm not suggesting that we don't need these mental health providers. I'm just concerned that the school budget is paying for them when there's insurance policies that could be paying for them. I don't know if that's true. That's a question. That's not a statement. And that's the frustration I feel as a school committee member is I feel like our school system needs, its first and foremost priority is educating the students, not to deny that they shouldn't have these services. The question is, right.
Excuse me.
That
This is not a question and answer period.
I do engage in CLAC, and I do keep track of that. Again, professing no pundency whatsoever. And I do understand that mental health is directly correlated to getting educated. The question is, what budget does it go into? And if there's health insurance policies that could provide those services that the student needs, then I would be concerned that our taxpayers are having to pay for health insurance that an insurance policy would cover, and I feel like we are padding insurance companies. I don't know that that's true. That's a question. That's not a statement. But that's where my curiosity would go to.
All right. Well, another comment?
I'll make it quick, very quick. I just wanted to say something to Mr. Collins about the concern that the dual language immersion or the one-to-one laptop initiative might be a concern that you have, that it might not be closing the achievement gap. And thank you for that comment. And so what I just wanted to say is that in the weeks ahead, as we look at that, it's something I'm personally going to be looking into, because I actually believe that they will help close the achievement gap. And so your question has caused sort of reflection to dig deeper into that and to find some data to support that. Thank you.
I'll expand on Myrna's comment as far as the one-to-one and hopefully closing that gap. The initial BYOD conversation that took place in our town was initiated through CLAC. CLAC was the one going, this technology can really assist my special needs student. And the specifics that they were demonstrating was my student struggles with personal interactions, and if they could interact with their education on a device, that's what they do at home. So I wanted you to be aware that the technology conversation really was started with CLAC and being curious, how can I get this technology into my students' education, because that's really where they're excelling or where they're feeling comfortable.
All right, it is now 10:17. I'd like to thank Mr. Alford for the budget presentation. Mrs. Stringfellow, great presentation. Welcome, Marianne, to the whole process. Thank you, members of the school committee. Do I need to hear a motion to close this, or can I just close this?
No motions.
All right. With that,